Maple tree angels. The day a broken dog taught us to breathe again, long before the maple tree split the sky with its final thunderous crack, before the storm sirens wailed and an ancient swing surrendered its rusted chain. Helen Moore found herself face to face with a ghost in dog's clothing. He was all bone and bruises, standing guard over nothing but shadows. Yet in those haunted eyes she sensed an unspoken oath: keep the small ones safe. She almost walked on until her grandson whispered, "He's hurting, Grammy." That moment lit a fuse stretching far beyond a single backyard. It would ignite secrets buried in federal files, shatter fences, both wooden and human, and spin rescue dogs and quiet children into unlikely heroes. You'll meet a boy who hasn't spoken in months, a retired handler chasing redemption, and a town councilwoman who'd rather rewrite ordinances than admit she was wrong. But at the center of every chapter stands Axel, tail low, spirit unbroken, insisting that courage is sometimes just the patience to stay. Stick around. By the time the last leaf drops from that maple, you might believe in angels with 4 paws. The morning sun filtered softly through the amber canopy above Willow Creek. Golden leaves drifted lazily down like blessings from the trees, crunching beneath each step as Helen Carter and her 5-year-old grandson Noah made their way along the worn sidewalk. The scent of chimney smoke lingered in the air, clinging to scarves and sleeves like memory. Helen adjusted the knit hat over Noah's ears as they passed Mrs. Lindley's porch, where pumpkins smiled with missing teeth, and a wooden "Welcome Fall" sign leaned slightly sideways. The boy's tiny boots stomped with purpose, chasing after shadows and skipping over cracks as if the world still held no danger. "This one's the best leaf ever," Noah declared, holding up a crimson maple, speckled with morning dew. Helen smiled gently. "It's a good one. Might even beat the 7 you found yesterday." He grinned up at her, the missing tooth from last month's fall still showing. The small paper bag in Helen's hand crinkled slightly, the last of yesterday's coins tucked inside for their usual treat. 2 warm cinnamon rolls from Everett's Bakery, their ritual, their comfort. A quiet morning that asked for nothing but presence. They rounded the corner onto Ash Street, where the old train station loomed like a forgotten relic. The building had been closed for over a decade. Bricks, faded, paint peeling like memories no one wanted to touch. The windows were long boarded up, but vines still crawled over them like they were trying to hold it all together. Helen glanced at it, as she always did. She had known that station once, back when her husband was alive, back when soldiers came home with duffel bags and hope in their eyes. It felt strange, watching it rot now. But life had its own way of moving on, even when people didn't. As they walked past, a sudden sound broke the stillness, a low, rasping whine. Noah froze. "Grandma," he whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "Did you hear that?" Helen paused. The breeze carried only rustling leaves and the distant bell of the bakery's door opening. But then there it was, again, a soft, almost pleading noise, coming from behind the station. "A chat," Noah guessed. "Could be," Helen replied cautiously, though something in her chest tightened. The sound had a weight to it, something raw and hoarse, not quite feline. Noah was already stepping toward the chain-link gate that separated the narrow alley from the sidewalk. The gate stood slightly ajar, sagging on its hinges like everything else in that part of town. "Noah, stay close," Helen said, her voice low but firm. They walked through the opening together, the air shifting as if the world held its breath just behind the station. The alley was cluttered with old pallets, discarded crates, and a rusty shopping cart half consumed by ivy. Everything smelled of damp stone, old oil, and silence. Then they saw him. Curled tight in the far corner, nearly invisible against the fence, was a German shepherd, or at least what once had been. He was gone tribs like rungs on a broken ladder, fur patchy and matted in places. One ear drooped unnaturally, but it was the eyes that stopped Helen cold. Not wild, not feral, just haunted. Deep pools of amber that spoke of waiting far too long, of watching too much loss. "Grandma," Noah whispered, voice soft. "He's hurt." Helen nodded slowly, her heart knocking against her ribs. She'd seen that look before on soldiers who came home with invisible wounds. From the shadows of the alley, a voice called out, "Best leave him be, Helen." They turned. It was Mr. Bowers, the hardware store owner from across the street. He stood at the edge of the alley, hands in the pockets of his flannel coat. "Dog's been there 3 days," he said. Ain't right in the head. Growled at Curtis yesterday. Nearly bit a delivery guy. Helen turned back to the animal. But the shepherd didn't growl. Didn't move. He simply stared. He hasn't bitten anyone, she said quietly. Yet, Bowers muttered. That's not a dog you want around your grandson. Noah was crouched now, a few steps ahead, rummaging in his jacket pocket. He pulled out the crushed granola bar from his lunch yesterday, the one Helen told him not to keep. Slowly, he placed it on the ground and backed away. The shepherd didn't move. He looked at the offering, then back at them, as if trying to decide if this was another trick the world was playing on him. Helen took a step forward and crouched next to her grandson. She didn't reach out, just knelt. Her knees ached, the morning cold soaked into her bones, but she stayed still. It's okay, she whispered, more to the dog than herself. The wind picked up, swirling leaves into the alley. One brushed against the shepherd's paw. He flinched, but still, he didn't run. That told her more than anything. Finally, Helen stood, brushing dust from her coat. We're not leaving him, she said aloud. Please? Noah added. He can stay with us. Helen hesitated. A German shepherd was no small commitment, especially one clearly traumatized. But something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the way the dog hadn't looked away. Or maybe she remembered the weight of another kind of silence, the kind that lingers when you walk past someone in need and pretend you didn't see. She reached into her coat, took the bakery money from the paper bag, and tore a corner off. Carefully, she wrapped the rest of the granola bar and laid it just a foot closer to the dog. We'll come back, she whispered. You don't have to trust us. Not yet. And then, gently, she took Noah's hand and led him out of the alley. As they walked the rest of the way to the bakery without cinnamon rolls, but with a mission in their hearts, the sun broke through the clouds above the old station, spilling light into the alley, where the forgotten dog lay watching, still and silent, but no longer unseen. The bakery bell rang faintly behind them as Helen and Noah retraced their steps through Willow Creek. But neither spoke of cinnamon rolls. Not anymore. The warm smell of sugar and spice had faded into something heavier, a quiet urgency that clung to the air like the mist still rising from the riverbanks. Noah held her hand tighter than usual, as if afraid the alley might vanish if they didn't hurry. His other hand clutched the paper bag with the saved portion of the granola bar, now carefully rewrapped like a gift. Helen's steps were slow but certain. Something in her chest had shifted when she looked into those amber eyes too, knowing for an ordinary dog. Not wild, not feral, just broken. They reached the chain-link gate once more. A blue jay startled from a nearby fence post and flew off with a shriek. The gate creaked as Helen pushed it open, and the world narrowed again into that hushed corridor behind the old train station. He was still there. The German shepherd hadn't moved from his corner. His body curled against the rusted fence like he had molded himself to it. His fur, once thick and noble, now hung in clumps from his frame. Flecks of dried blood darkened one flank. A patch above his left eye was raw, almost like an old burn. But his eyes, God, those eyes met Helen's again as she approached. No bark, no growl, just quiet defiance edged with bone-deep fear. The kind you didn't learn on the streets, but from being betrayed by something you once trusted. Noah stopped 3 paces behind her, crouching with careful reverence as he peeled open the bag. Do you think he remembers us? He whispered. Helen didn't answer right away. She lowered herself onto one knee, feeling the gravel bite into her joints. The wind funneled softly through the alley, stirring a loose strand of her gray hair. We remember him, she said finally. That's a start. She didn't move closer, didn't extend a hand, just watched. The dog blinked once, then again. Noah scooted forward on his knees and placed the granola bar in the same spot as yesterday, but this time he unwrapped it completely. The scent of oats and peanut butter drifted outward. The shepherd's nose twitched. Helen saw it barely perceptible, but it was something. A flicker of instinct peeking through the wreckage. He didn't lunge, didn't recoil. Just watched. A shadow moved behind them. Back again? It was Mr. Bowers. Same coat, same suspicion in his eyes. Thought you'd let animal control handle that mutt. Helen didn't turn around. Her voice was calm but firm. He's not a mutt, and he's not hurting anyone. Mr. Bowers scoffed. You think that dog got like that by cuddling with kids? He's got scars all over his legs. That's a working dog police. Or military, I'd bet. They train them to bite on command. If he snaps, you'll be the one with regret." Helen stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. "I've known men who were trained to kill," she said. "Most of them didn't need a command to be kind." Mr. Bowers shook his head and walked away, muttering something about stubborn women in liability lawsuits. But she didn't care. Her eyes were fixed on the shepherd. He was sniffing the granola now, not eating, just considering. It was the first choice she'd seen him make. Noah remained frozen beside her. "Can we name him?" Helen didn't answer at first. She thought of names, strong ones, gentle ones. But something told her this dog already had a name carried it, like a tattoo on his soul. To give him a new one would be wrong. He wasn't a blank slate. He was a survivor. Still, Noah waited for an answer. "What would you call a knight with no armor?" she asked softly. Noah thought. "Someone who still fights." Helen nodded. "Then maybe we call him Axel." The shepherd's ears flicked, subtle but definite. "Axel," Helen said again, this time with purpose. "That's you, isn't it?" And something happened then. Not a bark, not a growl, but a soft guttural sound, half exhale, half whimper, like an old engine trying to turn over after years of rust. Axel lowered his head. His nose nudged the granola once, then again, and slowly he ate. Helen didn't smile, didn't cheer. She simply watched with eyes that had seen too many men take their first bite of food after coming home from war. Noah looked up at her, eyes wide. "He's staying with us, right?" She nodded. Axel's tail didn't wag. Not yet. But it twitched once, like it remembered how. Helen stepped back and crouched once more, gently setting down a small plastic Tupperware of water she'd brought in her tote bag. Then she pulled something else out, a faded fleece blanket, still smelling of lavender. She didn't approach him directly, just laid the blanket near the fence, about 2 feet away from Axel. A gesture, not a demand. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "We'll try again." As they walked back home, the clouds began to gather above Willow Creek, and the light thinned. But behind the abandoned train station, a wounded shadow lay curled, not in isolation, but on a blanket that smelled of warmth and memory, beside the crumbs of a granola bar and the echo of a name that was once his. Axel. The boy had spoken it, and the dog, though broken, had not turned away. The third morning was colder. Frost crept along the edges of windows in Willow Creek, painting delicate webs over shop glass and picket fences. Helen's breath fogged the air in soft bursts as she and Noah made their way down the lane, bundled in layers too big for their frameshare in her faded maroon coat, him in the navy puffer jacket with the missing zipper tab. They brought scrambled eggs in a paper bowl this time. Helen figured Axel had earned something warm. Noah practically skipped ahead, stopping only when he reached the alley, and waited, as always, for her to go first. She smiled at father grandson, barely 5, already understood the quiet reverence required when approaching a wounded soul. But today, something was different. Axel wasn't curled in the corner. He stood, not straight, not proud, but standing nonetheless. His frame looked less skeletal under the fleece blanket Helen had left behind. One paw was still tucked slightly, the limp not yet healed, but he met their approach without retreating. His eyes followed Noah like they knew him now. Or maybe remembered him. "Good morning, Axel," the boy said, as naturally as if they'd been saying it for years. The name had stuck, not because Helen had agreed, but because the dog had responded. She'd watched it happen. The tilt of an ear, the flicker in his stare, the way he blinked slowly when Noah said it again the next morning. Names matter. And this one had found its way back to him. Helen crouched and placed the bowl gently on the ground. "It's real eggs today," she said softly. "Hope your stomach's ready." Axel didn't move for a moment. Then, cautiously, he approached. 1 step, then 2. Not toward Helen, toward Noah. The boy reached out, slow and steady, fingers open like a question. Axel sniffed them, and for the first time, he licked the child's wrist. Helen's breath caught in her chest. It was so small, so simple, but she knew what it meant. This was no longer survival. This was trust. Fragile, maybe, but blooming. She looked over her shoulder. A few paces away, Mrs. Kelly from the flower shop stood watching with narrowed eyes, clutching a steaming paper cup. Helen offered a polite nod. Mrs. Kelly didn't return it. "You're not really thinking of taking him in, are you?" the woman called, voice just loud enough to echo off the bricks. Helen didn't reply. Another voice chimed in, Mr. Bowers again, from across the street. "That breed's dangerous. One day it's licking your boy's hand, the next it's got his throat." "I've seen that dog growl at air," Mrs. Kelly added. "That's not normal." Helen straightened her spine. None of us are normal when we're afraid. She turned back to Axel, who was finishing the eggs with careful bites. The tremble in his hind leg had eased. His fur, though still patchy, held a soft sheen from the oil she gently rubbed into it the night before. He didn't look better, but he looked possible. A stray dog might survive. But a shepherd like this, a dog trained to serve, to follow, to guard, he would either be clammed or put down. No one in town would adopt him. Too big, too scarred, too unknown. Helen felt the weight of the choice gather in her lungs like cold air. "I have an old kennel in the shed," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone. "Still has Thomas's name on it." Noah looked up. "Can we bring him home, Grandma?" She hesitated. This wasn't a goldfish or a stray cat. This was a dog with muscle memory of pain and commands shouted under pressure. Whatever had brought Axel to that alley had nearly broken him. But not quite. And maybe, just maybe, that meant he was still worth saving. She knelt once more, closed this time, and reached out. Her hand stopped just short of Axel's cheek. "Would you let us try?" she asked. No pleading, just truth. Axel stared back. Then, slow as an old hinge, he stepped forward and rested the side of his head into her palm. Her fingers curled softly behind his ear. His skin flinched, but he didn't pull away. Noah clapped softly behind her. In that moment, it was decided, not announced, not declared, just accepted. Like the sun rising behind fog, or a forgotten song playing in a shop. Helen would take him home. They would make space. They would learn each other's silences. And together, perhaps, they would heal. That afternoon, Helen returned with a wagon. Noah held the leash loose, respectful, letting Axel walk on his own terms. It wasn't a triumphant march through town, but it was something deeper, a kind of quiet defiance against everything broken. Neighbors watched from windows. Some crossed the street to avoid them. A few simply stood still, arms folded. But Helen didn't stop. As they turned down Maple Lane toward the little yellow house with ivy creeping up the porch posts, a wind rustled the sycamore leaves and carried with it a strange feeling. Not quite hope, not yet, but something close, something that whispered, "This is the page where the story changes." The sun dipped behind the ridge just as Helen slid the bolt on the front door. The last warmth of October light filtered through the lace curtains, washing the room in the kind of gold that made everything look gentler than it was. But nothing felt gentle that evening. Axel stood frozen on the threshold. Not in defiancino, it wasn't that. His body said otherwise. Tail low, ears back, weight shifting from paw to paw like a question he didn't know how to ask. His eyes, those dark, watchful eyes, scanned every corner of the house as though danger might lunge from the wallpaper. Helen stepped aside, not urging, just letting him know the space was his to consider. He didn't step forward. Instead, Axel circled. Once, twice. Then he backed up and lowered himself, pressing his body against the floor just inside the door, not past the welcome mat. Helen exhaled, slow and quiet. "Suit yourself, sweetheart." "Oh." Noah appeared beside her, dragging the old Afghan blanket that usually lived on the couch. "He can have this." Helen ruffled his hair. "That's kind of you." Noah dropped the blanket beside Axel. The dog didn't flinch, didn't even blink, but he didn't move either. It was like watching someone hold their breath for hours. Later, after dinner, Helen watched from the hallway as Noah lay on his stomach at the top of the stairs, peeking down toward Axel. "He's not sleeping," the boy whispered. Helen nodded. "He's listening." To what? To everything. And he was. Every floorboard groan, every refrigerator hum, every whisper of forks clinking in the sink drew the dog's attention. His body tensed at the metallic scrape of a chair leg on the linoleum. When Helen dropped a spoon, he sprang up like someone had fired a weapon. It wasn't just fear. It was readiness. Conditioned alertness. She'd seen it before. In the hospital wards, she remembered the way soldiers slept with their boots on, how they flinched when someone opened a soda can, how they scanned exits before sitting down in a diner. She'd held the hands of young men who'd lost more than limbs. They'd lost the ability to exhale fully. Axel hadn't barked once, hadn't growled, but the silence in him was louder than any noise, like a storm wrapped in wool. After Noah went to bed blanket pulled to his chin, toy cars lined up along the windowsill. Helen made her way down the stairs, one slow creak at a time. Axel lifted his head but didn't rise. His body was still pressed against the baseboard like it was the only thing holding him up. She sat cross-legged on the bottom step, her knees cracking audibly. "Don't worry, I've been broken before too." Axel didn't move. She set a ceramic bowl of water beside him. Not close enough to threaten, but close enough to offer. "I had a husband," she said, as if they were old friends. "His name was Walter, fought in 2 tours. After he came back, he never walked through a room the same way again." The dog blinked. "He used to sleep by the door too. Said it felt safer, knowing no one could sneak up from behind." A long silence stretched between them, held only by the soft hum of the radiator. Helen reached over slowly and adjusted the blanket Noah had left. She didn't touch. Axel just nudged the fabric toward him like a peace treaty. To her surprise, he shifted, just slightly, just enough to rest one paw on the edge of the blanket. It was nothing. It was everything. She smiled. "You're not broken, you know. Just bruised. Deeply." Helen stood with effort, her bones protesting the cold. "We're all allowed to rest, Axel, even warriors." That night, sleep didn't come easily for her. She kept one ear trained to the creaks of the house. More than once, she rose and peeked over the banister. Each time, Axel remained theresolent, unmoving, except for his eyes that caught the faint glimmer of the hallway lamp like twin shards of midnight. But around 3 a.m., something changed. Helen stirred from a half-dream of water dripping and dogs barking in some desert she'd never been to. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She rose again. And there, at the bottom of the stairs, Axel was no longer curled tight. He had shifted onto his side. Not fully relaxed, but enough to let his chin rest on the edge of the blanket. His eyes were closed. She watched for a long moment. Then she whispered, barely audible through the dark, "Good boy." Helen returned to bed, the words she'd said earlier echoing in her mind. "You're not broken, just bruised." The storm came in sudden, uninvited. Willow Creek had been gentle all afternoon, clouds grazing overhead like sheep, a breeze that only nudged the wind chimes outside Helen's porch. But as dusk bled into evening, the wind turned sharp, carving down the chimney like a whistle. By dinner, the sky had dropped, and thunder rolled in low, like an old giant clearing his throat in the hills. Axel didn't flinch at the first crack, or the second. But when the third clap of thunder shook the panes in their wooden frames, he was gone. Helen turned from the stove just in time to see the streak of brown and black fur vanish beneath the kitchen table. He didn't bark, didn't whine, but the trembling was visible. Even from where she stood, his flanks shaking like he'd swallowed a motor. His tail was tucked so far it nearly touched his chest. His ears flattened, body pressed low, head ducked beneath the chair legs. "Noah," Helen said gently, setting the ladle aside. "Give me a minute, okay?" But Noah had already seen him. He stood at the threshold of the kitchen, barefoot, still in his school sweater, with a car decal peeling at the hem. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were locked on Axel. "Is he scared?" Noah whispered. Helen nodded. "Yes." Noah took a step forward. "Why?" "He's big." "Because even the big ones carry things," she said softly. "Especially them." Axel didn't move. His breathing was fast, too fast. She'd seen this before, too. Not the kind of fear that passes like a child afraid of lightning, but the kind that lived in marrow. Fear baked into reflex. The kind bred by memory, not weather. Another crack of thunder. Closer now. Rain slammed the tin awning out back. Axel shuddered. Noah, quiet as snowfall, disappeared into the hallway. Helen turned to check on the soup, but when she turned back, he was returning carrying the frayed Spider-Man blanket he'd kept since he was 2. It was faded now, washed too many times, edges stitched up in places with Helen's thick, clumsy thread. He dropped to his knees and crawled slowly under the table. Noah, Helen started, but she stopped herself. Because Noah wasn't scared. He wasn't even talking. He was moving with the carefulness of someone approaching something broken or sacred. Axel didn't growl, didn't snap. He just watched, with those dark, wary eyes. Noah stopped about a foot away. Then, without touching, he unfolded the blanket and draped it halfway across the tile floor. "You can hide here too," Noah said, his voice barely more than breath. "I do, sometimes, when it's too loud." Axel blinked. His nose twitched. The scent no doubt was familiar. Crayons, apples, dirt, childhood. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Axel shifted. Inch by inch, muscle by cautious muscle, he dragged himself forward, resting one paw on the edge of the blanket. He didn't lay down fully, but he didn't retreat either. Noah didn't move. Helen, standing by the stove, had forgotten about the soup entirely. Her eyes burned with a soft ache she hadn't felt in years. Another thunderclap. This one was sharp, splintered. Axel flinched, but then, almost reflexively, turned his head toward Noah and stayed. It wasn't comfort, not yet. But it was trust, beginning to flicker inside him like a match strike. Noah slowly reached for the blanket and gently covered Axel's shoulders. The dog tensed. Helen saw it, but then stilled. That blanket, worn and warm and heavy with childhood, became his first shelter in years. The storm outside didn't care. It raged on, wind rattling shutters, rain hammering the porch steps. But under the table, a boy and a dog breathed the same shaky rhythm. Noah leaned his back against the wall and said, "You don't have to be brave right now." Helen swallowed hard. Her hand braced on the edge of the counter. "You don't have to be brave right now." She had said that once to Walter, the week he came home from overseas, when he couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't even look her in the eyes for too long without flinching. She remembered how long it took him to respond to kindness, and how deeply it changed him when he finally did. Noah stayed there with Axel long after the thunder had wandered into the distance. The dog's trembling slowed, little by little, until it was nothing more than the twitch of a paw in sleep. When Helen finally placed the bowls of soup on the table, she crouched down and asked softly, "Is he okay now?" Noah nodded, not taking his eyes off Axel. "He's just scared." She ran her fingers gently through his hair. "So are a lot of us." That night, as Helen tucked Noah into bed, she found the boy already asleep with his feet still touching the edge of the bed frame, like he was saving space for someone else. And downstairs, beneath the kitchen table, Axel slept too curled, not against the wall this time, but square in the middle of a faded superhero blanket, as if, for the first time in years, he belonged somewhere. And the storm, for once, stayed outside. It was just after sunrise when Helen noticed the scar. The morning light slanted through the kitchen windows in a quiet hush, laying gold across the floorboards. Axel, still groggy from sleep, lay half-curled beneath the tableless, eyes open but soft, breath steady. It had been the calmest night since they brought him home. No pacing, no whimpering. Just the slow rise and fall of a body finally beginning to trust the floor beneath it. Helen knelt beside him, a dish of scrambled eggs cooling in one hand, and murmured, "You hungry today, sweetheart?" Axel didn't lift his head, but his tail gave a soft thump. She smiled and set the dish down, but as she reached to gently stroke the side of his neck, her fingers brushed something rough beneath the fur, something not quite right. She leaned in closer. The patch was barely noticeable, a thin line of uneven hair beneath his left ear. With slow, careful fingers, she brushed the fur aside. There, embedded just beneath the skin, was faded black ink. At first, it looked like a smudge, but as the light shifted, letters began to emerge sharp, blocky, and almost ghostly from where. Sentry, K9, A03. Helen's breath caught in her throat. She sat back on her heels, her fingers tingling. Military, or something like it. Her eyes dropped to the collar still hanging from Axel's neck. They hadn't removed it fully. He growled the first time she tried, so she left it be. But now, curiosity and concern pressed forward. She reached again, whispering reassurances as her fingers found the tiny loop beneath the matted leather. A small medallion clinked against her nail. It was metal, worn smooth by time and friction. She turned it in the light. Most of the engraving had been scratched off intentionally, it seemed, but two things remained: a partial barcode and the letters A03 etched faintly into the edge. Helen rose slowly, hands trembling, and walked to her laptop at the dining table. Axel didn't follow. He watched Therese, tracking every movement with quiet awareness, but his body remained still. He didn't seem afraid. He just looked resigned, as if he already knew what she was going to find. She opened the browser and typed, Sentry K9A03. Nothing. She tried again. Sentry Military Dog Program. Still, nothing concrete, just a few vague articles about decommissioned military canine units and a shuttered project rumored to be classified. Helen frowned. That tattoo wasn't standard military ID. She had seen dozens of military dogs at the VA during her nursing years. Their tags were simpler, clean, government-issued. This one was different. She dug deeper, searching through obscure forums, archived documents, old Reddit threads buried under years of dust. Her tea went cold. Her fingers stiffened from scrolling. But eventually, she found a single entry hidden in a now-defunct military working dog forum. Anyone heard of Sentry K9? Not Dodd. Black contract. Saw a dog marked A03. Quietest thing I've ever seen. Wouldn't bark. Just watched. Like it knew too much. Her heart skipped. She leaned in closer. No replies. Just a username Wraith 75 and a timestamp from over 6 years ago. Helen sat back in her chair, the silence of the house pressing against her. Outside, the world was beginning to stir footsteps on gravel. A dog barking 2 houses down. The faint murmur of a delivery truck. But inside, something colder had settled. She looked over at Axel, still lying under the table. His ears were up now, watching her. Not frightened, not curious. Just waiting. No one just ends up here, she whispered half to herself. Someone left you. Or someone lost you. She stood and walked back toward him. This time, he didn't flinch when she knelt. She touched his collar again, but gently. Who were you before all this, Axel? What did they make you do? His eyes met hers. Deep pools of shadow, reflecting flickers of a past she couldn't yet reach. But it was there. Beneath the surface, beneath the ink, the medallion, the silence, beneath every tremble at a slammed door, every flinch when the knife clinked on the plate. Helen brushed the fur behind his ear one more time. The tattoo was fading, but the pain it hinted at was not. She didn't know what sentry was. Not yet. But it hadn't been kind. And now, the dog it discarded was asleep under her table. Or maybe not discarded. Maybe escaped. She felt a chill. Some stories didn't begin with rescue. Some began with running. The park hadn't changed much since Helen was a girl. Same rusting jungle gym, same cracked benches, same swing set that groaned like it had a secret to tell. Noah liked it here despite its age. Maybe because it was quiet, or maybe because it was forgotten, just like the dog lying under the slide. Axel. It had been nearly a week since Helen brought him home, and though the murmurs from neighbors still followed them like shadows, today felt different, lighter somehow. The sun had chased off the morning chill, and though his cheeks flushed from play was smiling. Really smiling. Helen sat on the bench near the sandbox, sipping coffee from a chipped thermos. Her eyes flicked between Noah and Axel, never straying far from either. The boy swung slowly, toes barely brushing the mulch. Axel lay stretched on his side beneath the slide, his ear twitching at every creak of the chains above. Other parents watched from a distance. Some murmured behind paper cups. Others just stared. The dog still made people uneasy. He was too big, too still, too quiet, like a soldier on watch. But Helen had learned to read him now, the tiny tail flicks when Noah laughed, the way he'd rise and pace when a stranger walked too close. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He just watched. That, in itself, unsettled people more than if he had snarled. Noah giggled as he pushed himself higher, the chains groaning louder with each swing. "Look, Mama," he called, leaning back, hair sweeping the air. Helen smiled. Not too high, baby. That thing's ancient. Axel's ears perked. The wind picked up, rustling the dead leaves into miniature cyclones across the gravel path. In the distance, a lawnmower buzzed like an angry bee. Helen took another sip, but her eyes never left the swing. Noah was midair when it happened. The snap wasn't loud, it was more like a dry pop, a sharp ping that cracked the air. Then everything moved in a blur. The right chain broke first. The swing twisted violently. Noah's small body lurched sideways, gravity wrenching him toward the hard-packed mulch below. Helen's heart seized. But before her scream could leave her throat, Axel moved, like a shot, from stillness to motion in less than a breath. A blur of tan and black. He crossed the distance in 4 strides, planted his front paws, and launched himself beneath the falling child just as the swing collapsed. There was a sickening thud, then silence. For a moment, no one breathed. Helen ran legs numb, breath caught halfway between panic and prayer. When she reached them, Noah was lying atop Axel's back, his arms curled instinctively around the dog's neck. Axel had twisted mid-leap, taking the brunt of the fall across his shoulders and spine. "Noah," she gasped, falling to her knees. Are you hurt?" The boy blinked, then slowly shook his head. "I'm okay, Mama. He caught me." Axel didn't move. His chest rose in quick, shallow breaths. His eyes remained open, blinking slowly. Not in pain, just stunned. Helen's hand shook as she ran them over Noah's limb, checking for bruises, breaks, blood. Nothing. A scrape on the elbow. That was it. Her hands moved to Axel, pressing gently along his ribs, his spine. He winced, but stayed still. By now, the other parents had gathered. A man with a stroller stepped closer. "That dog just caught him," he said, voice tight with disbelief. Another woman nodded, her hand over her heart. He moved before the swing snapped, like he knew. Helen cradled Noah closer, one hand resting on Axel's broad neck. For the first time since she'd brought him home, no one told her to keep the dog on a leash. No one told her he was dangerous. They just stood there, watching, in awe. The judgment that had followed them through town, through whispers at the grocery store, side glances at the school gate, began to fracture in that moment. Not vanish, but fracture. Axel stirred. He let out a soft grunt, then shifted his weight slowly, helping Noah slide off gently to the side. The boy, wide-eyed, placed both hands on the dog's face. "You saved me," he whispered. Axel didn't blink, didn't move, but his tail thumped once. Helen wiped a tear from her cheek before it fell. "You didn't just save him," she said quietly, leaning into Axel's fur. "You chose him." There was power in that choice, in a dog so broken, so wary, deciding to intervene. Not because he was trained to, not because of a command, but because, in that moment, he wanted to. Helen looked up, meeting the eyes of every bystander now huddled around the broken swing. "He's not just a dog," she said quietly. "He's family." And for once, no one argued. By the time the wind shifted and autumn leaves scattered across Maple Avenue, the story had already grown legs. It drifted through back porches, coffee shops, and the narrow booths of Lila's diner like smoke through a cracked window, curling around people's assumptions, staining their tones with either awe or suspicion. "He caught the boy mid-air, like a bullet," someone whispered over a steaming latte. "A German Shepherd, I think. No. Part Doberman, too. Big black thing. Real quiet. I saw it." An older man in a flat cap insisted at the barber shop. "Didn't even growl. Just moved." But not all voices carried admiration. Sarah Pendleton, head of the neighborhood council, sat at her kitchen table that afternoon, her mouth pursed tight, like she was holding back a sour taste. She pushed aside the local paper, its front page headline bold with, "Dog Hero or Danger." Her daughter, Olivia, a 4th grader at Willow Creek Elementary, was drawing a picture of Axel and Noah on the back of a cereal box. The child's pencil traced strong legs, kind eyes, and a tail curved like a question mark. "You shouldn't encourage that," Sarah murmured, her voice clipped. Olivia looked up. "Why not? He's nice. He saved Noah." "Because you don't really know what he is." In the town's online forums, it was even worse. One thread asked, "Do we know this animal's history?" Another, "Who takes responsibility if he snaps?" A post had even linked an old article from another county. Ex-military dogs. Trained heroes or ticking time bombs. Helen saw it all. She didn't respond. She simply closed the laptop, looked at Axel asleep by the wood stove own paw over his muzzleland, returned to folding laundry in silence. She didn't need to argue. She had seen his eyes when Noah cried in his sleep, the way Axel paced until the nightmare calmed. She had felt his hesitation at thresholds, his flinch when metal clinked against porcelain. This was no monster. Still, words carried weight, and soon they began to reshape the town's landscape. At Lila's bakery, the server asked softly, "Do you mind keeping him leashed?" Even though he always sat quietly by the counter, not even lifting his head at the clatter of trays. At the library, a young mother steered her stroller to the opposite aisle when she saw Axel waiting outside. Her toddler asked, "Can I pet the dog?" But she muttered, "No, honey. That one's not like the others." Even the mailman, usually friendly now, paused several feet from the porch and tossed letters from a distance, pretending not to meet Helen's eyes when she stepped out. Noah had noticed too. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked a little closer to Axel on their morning routes. Sometimes he'd loop the leash tighter around his small hand, as if to say, "I've got you," even though he was the one being watched over. That Thursday, Helen found a note taped to her front gate in block letters. "We're watching. Be smart." It wasn't signed. It didn't have to be. She took it down without a word, folded it twice, and slid it into the drawer beneath the sink where she kept spare batteries and rubber bands and things she didn't want Noah to see. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, Helen stared into her tea and whispered, "Maybe this town isn't ready." Axel lifted his head from the rug. His ears twitched. He stood, walked over, and rested his chin gently on her lap. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just placed her hand on his neck, her fingers brushing the faint scar beneath his earth ghost of that Sentry K9A03 tattoo, and let out a long, breathless sigh. Meanwhile, at the town hall community room, Sarah Pendleton stood before a whiteboard with a dry erase marker and a list titled Upcoming Issues. Beneath Halloween fair and tree trimming permits was a fresh entry, Unregistered Dangerous Animals. She underlined it twice. A man in the back raised his hand. "You mean the dog? Helen's dog?" Sarah didn't answer directly. She just said, "All I know is, we have a responsibility to the safety of our children. I'm not here to create panic. I'm here to prepare." Someone else muttered, "Well, he did save that kid." Sarah turned, eyes sharp. "Until he doesn't." Back at home, Noah had gone to bed hugging Axel's old blanket, now smelling faintly of wood smoke and dog fur. It had become a kind of talisman, as if the boy believed that so long as he held it close, Axel would stay and everything would be safe. Outside, the wind tugged at the shutters. Inside, Axel slept at the foot of the stairs again, not because he had to, but because he chose to. There was something ancient in the way he positioned himself, back against the door, eyes half open, like he remembered a duty from long ago, or perhaps never stopped carrying it. And somewhere in the darkness beyond Willow Creek, a man in a long coat parked a car beneath a crumbling overpass. He pulled out an old file from his glove compartment. The photo was faded, paper curled at the corners. K9A03. Status: unaccounted. Assumed decommissioned. The man lit a cigarette. Ash fell across the dashboard. He narrowed his eyes. Then, slowly, he began to drive toward town. The bakery bell chimed with its usual hollow clink as Helen stepped inside, the scent of warm rye and cinnamon barely soothing the quiet war building inside her chest. She clutched the folded sheet of paper against her palm like a fragile declaration. For the past week, whispers in Willow Creek had turned into full-fledged conversations, most of them behind closed doors, but some boldly in front of her face. "Doberman Shepherds are unstable," someone had murmured outside the school gates. "I heard it lunged once toward the swing set," another had added, conveniently forgetting the child Axel saved. Helen knew that fear had a way of dressing itself in certainty. It wore the face of caution, of just being safe, but she had seen this kind of fear before. In war zones, it cloaked itself as suspicion. In hospital corridors, it manifested as liability. And now, here in this sleepy town with white fences and window planters, it paraded as community concern. She made her way to the counter where Loretta, silver-haired woman with hands like braided dough, was placing sugar-dusted scones onto a tray. Their eyes met, There was a pause. Not hostility. Not warmth either. Something in between. Helen smiled, polite. Just the usual sourdough. And, do you mind if I post something on the community board? Loretta's hands stopped mid-placement. Depends what it is. Helen unfolded the paper and handed it over. The words were handwritten, black ink looping with quiet purpose. Sometimes protection doesn't wear a uniform, it wags its tail. Beneath it, a small sketch Noah had drawn Axel sitting upright, alert, with a child's crayon heart behind him. No names, no politics, just truth. Loretta read it slowly, her face softened. You always did know how to say something without shouting. Sometimes shouting is the easy part, Helen replied, her voice low. Loretta nodded once and took the thumbtack from the edge of the corkboard. With a decisive push, she pinned the message up center stage, between flyers for piano lessons and a missing cat named Pickles. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the brittle leaves along Main Street. Helen walked past the diner where the Friday coffee crowd had gathered Sarah Pendleton among them, her pressed blazer-like armor in the breeze. Their eyes met through the glass. Sarah didn't wave, but she raised an eyebrow and took a sip of her tea as if to say, "We're watching." Helen didn't flinch. She just walked on. That night, Axel lay curled on the rug in the living room, his breathing slow, one ear twitching even in sleep. Noah sat cross-legged beside him, tracing the edges of Axel's scarred ear with quiet reverence. He's like a knight, Noah whispered. But people only see the dents in his armor. Helen stood in the doorway, her heart pinched. People fear what they don't understand, baby. Sometimes it takes time. Ins fraff. Noah looked up, his eyes too wise for 8. Then we show them, slowly, with good things. She smiled, walked in, and sat beside them. The house was silent except for the hum of the heater and the slow tick of the kitchen clock. She reached out and gently scratched behind Axel's ear. For a moment, his eyes opened just a sliver. He didn't move away. That was enough. But the next morning, the storm hit. It wasn't wind or rain, but ink on paper. Folded in the mailbox was an anonymous letter, typed, unsigned. For the safety of the children, please consider removing the dog. Not everyone feels safe, and not all rescues are worth the risk. Helen's hands trembled not with fear, but with fury contained. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She folded the letter back up, placed it in her drawer, and walked outside. Axel was in the yard, watching the road. Always watching. Silent, still, like a soldier who never clocked out. She walked toward him, kneeled beside him, and pressed her forehead gently against his. His body tensed for just a second, then relaxed. I don't know who you were before, she whispered. But I know what you are now, and that's enough for me. Axel didn't move, but his eyes, those solemn, shadowed eyes, blinked once, slowly, as if he understood. By afternoon, the note at the bakery had drawn attention. Some took photos, others scoffed, but a surprising few added their own notes beneath it. Post-its, scraps of receipts, a torn napkin. My son sleeps better knowing that dog is nearby. He saved that boy. Don't forget that. There's more kindness in his eyes than some folks I know. And then, in blocky, awkward handwriting, Noah's. His name is Axel, and he saved me. By week's end, the noteboard had become a mosaic of quiet rebellion compassion stitched between ads and complaints. The town wasn't healed, but something was changing, shifting. At the community meeting held that Friday, Sarah Pendleton stood before the folding chairs in the town hall, clutching her stack of concerns. There is still risk, she said. We must think about liability. Helen stood too. No argument here, she said calmly. There is risk, but there's also truth. And sometimes, what we fear isn't the threat. It's the reminder that loyalty, once broken, can still be restored. Someone clapped. Then, another. Sarah didn't respond. But she didn't speak again either. That night, Axel lay at the foot of Noah's bed, curled not in tension, but in comfort. The boy slept deeply, one hand dangling off the mattress, resting against the soft fur of the dog who had once only trusted silence. Helen stood at the doorway again, watched the rise and fall of both their chests, and for the first time since the alley, she whispered to herself, He's home, outside, The wind died down. The town still murmured, but within these walls, one truth rang clear. Not all uniforms are stitched from thread. Some are stitched from scars and a second chance. It was always around 11:17 p.m. that the house went still. The kind of stillness not born from sleep, but from held breath of pause between a memory and a ghost. Outside, Willow Creek quieted down to its winter hush. Porch lights blinked off one by one, a curtain of frost slipping over the town like a hush-toned lullaby. But inside the Wells home, Axel stood guard. He never lay fully down. Not really. His body curled in a half-watch position, front paws extended like crossed sabers, his ears tracking every creak of floorboard, every moan of the settling house. He stayed at the foot of the stairs, always at that same spot, his eyes locked toward the hallway where Helen's bedroom sat tucked behind an old barn-style door. Some nights, his gaze drifted toward Noah's room, where a nightlight shaped like a lighthouse cast a circle of comfort against the far wall. But even then, his body never softened. His ribcage moved in shallow, steady breaths, and always facing the door. It was Helen who broke the pattern first. One night train slicing sideways across the windows, she came down in her robe and slippers, a tattered journal cradled in her arms. Her eyes were shadowed with old grief, but there was a kind of anchor in her voice when she spoke. "I figured if you're going to keep watch," she murmured, easing herself down beside him on the bottom step, "you might want some company." Axel didn't move, but his eyes flicked toward her, and that was enough. She opened the leather-bound journal. Its corners were worn soft from years of travel, the spine frayed like an old friend's elbow. Helen cleared her throat once, twice. The 4th of September, Kabul. Found 2 children hiding beneath an overturned fruit cart. Both alive, barely. I watched Captain Monroe hand off his ration bar, the good kind chocolate and peanut butter. He told me later he hadn't eaten in 27 hours. Axel shifted slightly, not toward her, not away, just acknowledged. Helen looked over the edge of the page. "You know, you remind me of them, the boys. Not in how you look, in how you hold your silence like it's heavier than your bones." Thunder rumbled faintly outside. Axel didn't flinch this time. He simply watched. Helen kept reading. Every night after that, it became a ritual. The sound of old paper, of soft memories given voice. She didn't always read war entries. Some nights, she read letters. Others, she just talked to no one in particular, or maybe to the shadows that lingered near the edges of the room. "I used to think healing was a thing you did alone," she confessed one night, the fire crackling low behind her. "But maybe it's more like a story someone else holds for you when you're too tired." Axel blinked slowly, head resting on his paws. Then came Noah. He never said much. Not after 9 p.m. He claimed his words went to sleep before he did, but around night 5, he shuffled down the steps in mismatched socks, a small plastic soldier in hand. "For him," Noah whispered, offering it to Axel. The dog didn't move at first. Then, with the gentlest motion, he lowered his head and touched the toy with his nose. From then on, it was always the 3 of them. Each night, Helen would read. Noah would come down with another little figure, sometimes a soldier, sometimes a plastic dinosaur, once even a Lego man with a cape. Axel never played with them, but he let them stay, arranging themselves like sentinels near his paws. He let Noah sit close, sometimes leaning against his side with the trust only children and old dogs seemed to understand. On the 7th night, something shifted. Helen read a passage about a night patrol gone wrong. She paused on a line her husband had written in tiny, almost reluctant script. There was a dog, not ours. Tagged, but scarred up like he'd seen too much. He wouldn't leave our unit alone. Slept outside the tent for 3 nights before we gave him water. After that, he never left. Her voice caught, just for a second. Axel lifted his head. She looked at him then, really looked. "Was it you?" Silence. But the way he looked, back unblinking, steady it made something tremble in her chest. She didn't ask again. Some truths don't need repeating. Some names, like old wounds, only answer once. Later that night, as Helen dozed off against the stair rail, Axel rose for the first time during night watch. He padded toward the fireplace, lay down beside her, and exhaled. Not all the way. Not yet. But enough. Upstairs, Noah placed another toy soldier on his windowsill and whispered, "He's starting to sleep." Outside, the wind shifted direction. A dry leaf scraped across the porch. The house sighed. And downstairs, beneath flickering lamplight and the quiet remnants of memory, the first crack in Axel's armor let in something not unlike rest. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of it. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the low hum of the wind pressing against the window panes. A Saturday afternoon sun filtered through the bathroom window, casting long, golden slats of light over the tiled floor. The tub had already been filled halfway with warm water, a few plastic boats bobbing gently against the porcelain edge like survivors adrift after a storm. Axel stood frozen at the threshold. His paws stayed planted on the hall carpet, body rigid, tail low and unmoving. His eyes, a dark and glistening amber, flicked between Helen's soft gaze and the sloshing water just a few feet away. He didn't growl, didn't bark, but every muscle in his frame was coiled like a spring, like a soldier awaiting the sound of distant gunfire. Noah knelt beside the tub in his overalls, his tiny hands guiding the little blue tugboat across the surface. "It's warm," he whispered, not looking at Axel. "You don't have to go in, but if you want, you can be captain." The corner of Helen's mouth lifted. She had let Noah take the lead. Children had a way of knowing when to speak gently, when to offer space. Perhaps because they, too, lived in a world they didn't fully control. She sat down on the floor just outside the bathroom, keeping her back against the wall. "We're not here to scrub off your past, Axel," she murmured. "We're just washing the dust off the present." Axel shifted slightly. His front paws moved 1 inch forward, then stopped. His breathing remained low and steady, but his ears twitched at every splash of water. There were no commands, no leash, no collar tugging him forward. Just Noah's steady hands and that strange, calming silence that only children and animals seem to understand. Helen remembered what one veteran at the clinic once told her. "It's not the explosions that stay with you. It's the silence between them, the waiting." She had seen it in men who flinched at the sound of forks scraping on plates, who stared at the horizon too long. She saw it now in Axel's eyes. This wasn't about a bath. It was about trust. Noah reached over to place a green army man on the edge of the tub. It stood sentinel next to the shampoo bottle. "This guy's guarding the soap," Noah whispered with a grin. "Nobody attacks during bath patrol." Axel's head tilted. Then, finally, he moved, not all at once. Not in a burst, but slow, deliberate steps. Like his instincts were still unsure whether this was a mission or a mistake. He padded forward, sniffing at the rim of the tub, the scent of lavender and warm tile, mixed with faint hints of dust and wood polish. He looked at Helen, then down at Noah, and then, tentatively, he dipped one paw into the water. No one moved. Noah's eyes widened, his mouth barely open in a silent cheer. "You're doing it, Axel." The second paw followed. Then, with a low exhale that sounded almost like a sigh, Axel climbed in fully. Water sloshed gently against the walls of the tub as his weight shifted, but he didn't flinch this time. He simply stood there, halfway in, halfway out of fear, as if waiting for the past to return and pull him under. But it didn't. Instead, Noah slowly scooped a plastic cup of water and let it trickle down Axel's back. The dog twitched, but didn't retreat. Helen leaned over, her hands moving in slow, circular motions, rubbing the warm water across his matted fur, careful not to startle him. No soap yet, just water. And then something unexpected happened. As the grime dissolved, as the layers of roadside dust and old soot washed away, Axel's coat began to reveal its true colora, rich, deep mahogany glinting beneath the light like burnished oak. His body, once camouflaged by the dullness of survival, now glowed with vitality. He looked magnificent, Noah gasped. "He's not black. He's like a knight's horse." Helen smiled softly. "He's beautiful." Axel remained still, his eyes fluttering closed for a moment under Helen's touch. Not asleep, but something close, peaceful, just for now. There were still scars on his side, old, healed ones that told stories no one could fully understand, the kind only time and war leave behind. But Helen didn't ask about them. She only rinsed them gently, like brushing dust off an old photograph. She reached for a small towel, holding it open. "All right, Captain Axel," she whispered. "Mission complete." Noah beamed as Axel stepped out of the tub, water dripping from his coat like slow rain off a soldier's gear. Helen wrapped him carefully in the towel, pressing the fabric against his shoulders and chest. And as she knelt there, drying this broken but whole creature, she whispered something barely audible. "You did it. You stayed." That night, Axel slept not at the stairs, but at the threshold of Noah's room. He didn't pace, didn't circle, just lay there, eyes half closed, as the boy's soft snoring drifted out into the hallway like a lullaby. Helen paused at her door, watching the silhouette of Dog and Childone dreaming, one keeping watch. She didn't say anything, just let the image sink in like rain into thirsty earth. In the distance, a storm gathered over the hills. But in this house, that night, nothing stirred. The war had not ended. But something had begun, a quiet truce between past and present, and sometimes healing sounded like nothing at all, only the soft drip of bathwater in a drain, and a plastic tugboat, still floating. The morning began like any other quiet, slow, the kind of stillness that hung thick over a home still in healing. The kettle hummed on the stove, while golden slants of light pushed gently through the kitchen blinds, streaking across the wooden floor like softened memory. Noah sat cross-legged on the living room rug, his toy soldiers arranged with careful precision. The battlefield today was made of pillows and imagination, a fortress of solitude where the brave never bled, and no one had to say goodbye. His eyes, still sleepy, flicked between the figurines and the sound of cereal popping in milk beside him. He hummed softly under his breath, something barely melodic, more like the language of comfort only children speak. From the hallway, quiet footsteps padded in. Axel. The Doberman Shepherd emerged, tail low but not tucked, body cautious but no longer coiled in fear. His amber eyes scanned the room the way a soldier scans a horizon, old instinct, trained reflex. But something in him had changed, a tension released, a thread loosened. Maybe it was the warmth, maybe the child's stillness, or maybe it was simply time. Axel approached slowly, his nails clicking lightly on the floorboards until they met the rug's edge. There, just a few feet from Noah, he paused. The boy noticed and looked up, but didn't speak. He had learned not to. Words sometimes scared the dog. Instead, he smiled, small, quiet, patient. That's when Axel did something he had never done before. He lowered his head to the floor, nudged one of the small plastic soldiers with his nose, and gently, so gently, lifted it in his mouth. It was the one with the dented helmet and faded green paint, Noah's favorite. The dog carried it toward the boy like it was glass, stopping just within reach. Then he placed it on the floor, deliberate, soft. His eyes never left Noah's. Noah blinked, startled. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Axel backed away. One step, then another. Not out of fear, but as if giving space. As if offering something sacred and waiting to see if it would be accepted. From the kitchen doorway, Helen saw it all. She didn't speak immediately. Her hand stayed wrapped around her coffee mug, but her heart stuttered. She had seen 1,000 kinds of offerings in her time-wounded soldiers, placing broken memories into the hands of people they trusted. And now here, in the quiet of her home, she watched a dog do the same. Axel wasn't playing. Not in the way people usually meant. He was making contact. An offering, a beginning. Noah looked at the soldier on the floor, then slowly picked it up and held it gently in his hands, like something living. "That's his first gift to you," Helen said quietly, her voice catching just slightly in her throat. Noah turned to her, then back to Axel, who stood near the door now, eyes steady, tail still, and then almost imperceptibly Noah nodded. Later that day, Helen found Axel lying beneath the oak tree in the backyard, chin resting on the cool dirt, watching the wind move through the grass. She approached quietly and crouched beside him. "You miss someone, don't you?" she whispered, brushing her fingers just lightly behind his ear. He didn't flinch. "I know that. Look, I've seen it on men too proud to cry. On women too tired to scream." She sat down on the ground beside him, knees creaking as she settled. "You don't have to play fetch, or run, or bark. But today, what you did, that was brave." Axel didn't move, but his ear twitched and his breathing slowed. Back inside, Noah placed the gifted soldier at the center of his pillow fortress. Not with the others. This one didn't belong in battle. This one had a new role now. Guardian. That night, Noah left his bedroom door open. It had been weeks since Axel first came, and the dog still slept downstairs. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, Noah waited. And when the soft rustle of paws approached hesitant at first, then deliberate, the boy didn't move, didn't speak. Axel paused at the threshold. Then with careful steps he crossed the room, circled once at the foot of the bed, and lay down with a soft thud. Outside, wind whispered through the trees. Inside, a boy and a dog, both scarred in ways they couldn't name, found, in the silence, something unspoken. Not healing, not yet, but trust. And that, sometimes, was enough for the first play. The morning sunlight broke gently over the back fence, spilling gold onto the dew-dappled lawn. It was the kind of spring day that seemed to breathe on its own birds, threading song through branches, the wind soft like lullabies, and the world feeling, for once, like it could stay kind. Helen was kneeling by her rose bushes, hands in soil, fingertips stained the color of quiet work. She hummed an old melody she didn't quite remember the words, to something her mother once sang while hanging laundry in the breeze. Each snip of her pruning shears released a sweet, almost shy perfume into the air. She glanced back toward the house just once, and then turned to the garden with a soft smile. Today felt lighter. Noah's laugh rang out across the lawn, a rare high sound that startled even the wind into pausing. He darted behind the hydrangeas near the garden wall, eyes wide, knees muddy, shirt untucked. It was his turn to hide. Axel stood near the porch steps, head tilted, ears perked. He had been watching Noah for 10 minutes now, following each movement with quiet interest. His body no longer held that rigid alertness it once did. Instead, there was a looseness in his stance, a softness that hadn't been there when he first arrived. The boy peeked out from the bushes. Axel looked straight at him but didn't move. Then, with the most deliberate kind of mischief, the dog turned his head the other way. Noah's hands flew to his mouth, stifling another giggle. Helen saw it. From behind the rose bushes, she watched it unfold with the reverence one might hold for a miracle too fragile to name. Axel took a few exaggerated steps forward, sniffing the air, pretending to look for someone. His tail wagged, not just once, not the short, guarded kind of wag that meant uncertainty. This one was slower, fuller, like a memory returning to the body, like something waking up that had been asleep too long. Axel lowered his head, nose to the grass, sniffing dramatically in the wrong direction. Behind the hydrangeas, Noah crouched lower, unable to hold back the laughter this time. His joy spilled out like sunlight through cracked shutters, sun-controlled, unfiltered. Axel froze. He turned suddenly and trotted toward the bushes, nose twitching like he'd finally caught the scent. But as he reached the hiding spot, he paused just inches away and sat down, still pretending. He waited. Noah burst from the green like a firecracker. Boo! Axel jumped just slightly, just enough to play along, and barked once, short and bright. The two froze for a second, staring at each other. Then, as if breaking an unspoken rule of silence, Noah ran, laughing so hard, his steps became unsteady. Axel chased him, not in a burst, not wild, just enough to keep pace, tongue lolling, tail a metronome of something long forgotten. Joy. Helen stood, brushing dirt from her knees, heart blooming in rhythm with her roses. She didn't call out. She didn't want to stop it. What was unfolding wasn't a game, or not really. It was communion, a language born from laughter and healing, where bark and breath replaced words, where eyes spoke what mouths never could. Axel and Noah circled the garden twice before the boy dropped into the grass, breathless, arms stretched wide. The dog slowed, then lay down beside him, chest heaving, their bodies close but not touching. Noah turned his head. Axel did the same. And in that quiet moment, something passed between theme and agreement, sealed not with a handshake, but with stillness. They were no longer strangers, not child and dog, not survivor and witness, but something else, something simpler. Companions. Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic soldier, the same one Axel had once offered him. He placed it gently on the grass between them. A gesture returned. Axel lowered his head and touched it with his nose, letting it rest there. Helen finally stepped forward, her shadow long in the afternoon light. "You boys done with war games?" she teased. her voice soft but carrying just enough. Axel's ears flicked toward her. Noah sat up. "Can we play again tomorrow?" The boy asked not to his grandmother, but to the dog. Axel responded with a low huff and a wag. The answer, unspoken, was yes. That night, Helen marked a note in her journal. The 17th of April. Axel wagged his tail today. And meant it. The garden was quieter than usual. A hush had settled over the late afternoon like a secret waiting to be told. The sun dipped lower, casting long amber shadows across the lawn, painting gold along the edges of petals and leaves. The hydrangeas, once playful hiding spots, now stood still like silent sentries. Noah sat cross-legged near the raspberry bushes, cradling a twig like it were a sword from one of his storybooks. Axel lay nearby, head resting on his front paws, ears rotating with every breeze, every creak of the old oak behind them. His body was relaxed, but not asleep, never entirely asleep. From the tree line at the far end of the backyard, something moved. It was slight just, a rustle at first, like wind through dry leaves. But Axel's ears flicked upright, his breath stilled, his muscles coiled, not in fear, but readiness. Noah, oblivious, was drawing patterns into the dirt with his stick, humming to himself. The fox emerged, like a shadow stepping out of another world. It was thin, ribs showing through matted red fur, eyes wild, not cruel, just desperate. Its snout twitched, scanning for food, for opportunity, for weakness. Axel rose. No sound, no bark, just a silent shift, like a curtain being drawn. He moved between Noah and the fox knot, charging, not snarling, just positioning. Like a gate clicking shut, the fox paused. So did time. The wind dared not breathe. Even the birds stopped singing. Axel stood tall, his body firm but not threatening. His posture spoke in a language only animals understood. Not this one, not today. The fox inched forward, low to the ground. Its teeth bared, but faintly. A warning. Not a promise. Noah looked up. His eyes widened. "Axel?" he whispered. The dog didn't glance back. The standoff snapped. The fox lunged not toward Noah, but toward the raspberry patch beside him. Hunger had made it reckless. Survival had made it blind. Axel was faster, with a growl deep in guttural not rage, but resolve. He met the fox midair, bodies colliding in a blur of fur and sound. The scuffle lasted seconds. Long enough to stir the air, short enough to feel like a blink. Noah screamed, a short, raw sound that ripped into the quiet. Helen heard it from the kitchen. By the time she threw open the door, Axel had pinned the fox, not mauling, not attacking, just forcing it back, forcing it to leave. The fox wriggled, hissed, and finding no victory, retreated. Its body vanished into the underbrush, swallowed by the same shadows that birthed it. Axel stood still, breathing heavy. A patch of fur on his shoulder torn, a shallow gash along his right leg already darkening with blood. But he didn't check his wound. He turned to Noah, limping, yes, but eyes sharp, full of focus. He sniffed the boy's face, nudged his arm, his knees, his side checking, searching. "Are you hurt? Are you whole?" Noah trembled, but nodded. "I'm okay," he said, voice barely a thread. Axel exhaled, just one sand, lay down beside him, finally letting the tremor in his leg show. Helen ran across the grass, breath caught in her throat. "Oh God," she gasped, dropping to her knees. "Axel." Her hands hovered, wanting to touch, afraid to hurt. Axel licked her wrist softly, as if to say, "It's not me you should be worried about." "He saved me," Noah said. The boy's hands were shaking as he reached out, pressing his small fingers gently to Axel's head. The gesture was careful, reverent. Helen inspected the wound, nothing life-threatening, but deep enough to need attention. Blood had started to pool in the fur just above Axel's paw. But he didn't whine, didn't flinch, only looked at the boy, only watched to be sure. Later, after the wound had been cleaned, disinfected, and wrapped, Axel lay on the rug by the fireplace. The garden game, now a distant echo. Noah sat beside him, curled like a comma, tracing slow shapes on Axel's bandaged leg. Helen made tea she wouldn't drink. She kept glancing toward them, heart heavy but full. There were no medals for dogs like Axel, no headlines, no applause. But there were moments like this, moments where protection wasn't a duty, it was instinct, where love didn't need words, just action, where a scar became a story told through presence. Noah yawned, head drifting onto Axel's shoulder. "I wasn't scared," he murmured, but his hand tightened in the dog's fur. Axel didn't move, just stayed. He always did. Sarah Pendleton was the sort of woman who pruned her hedges at the same time every Saturday and corrected the grammar on public flyers with a red pen. She was precise, opinionated, and fiercely committed to what she believed made a community safe. And up until this very morning, Axel Helen Moore's Doberman Shepherd had fallen firmly into the category of unsafe. She stood in her kitchen, stirring her tea with clinical efficiency, the spoon clinking against the ceramic like a ticking metronome. Her eyes, as they often did, wandered to the window above her sink. The Moore backyard unfolded in fragments through the slats of the blinds. The battered oak tree, the garden hose curled like a sleeping snake, the child's swing swaying gently in the breeze. And there at the far corner near the rose bushes, Noah. She had come to expect his presence now, the quiet boy with solemn eyes and a silence that somehow filled the air louder than any tantrum. Most children his age were chatterboxes or troublemakers, but Noah was still, watchful, and now always accompanied by the dark figure of the dog, Axel. The name alone had once made her stiffen, but today was different. She'd seen it all. The fox had come out of nowhere, lean and frantic, its eyes glinting with something feral. It leapt from the thicket behind her fence and dashed into the moor yard like a streak of red lightning. Sarah's teacup had clattered against the sink when she saw the fox's teeth, saw the blur of fur lunging toward the child. But before she could even form a scream, Axel was there. It hadn't been savage. It hadn't been violent in the way she'd feared for so long. It had been calculated, trained, instinctive, in the most protective sense of the word. Axel had placed his body between the child and the intruder with a speed that startled her. Not a single bark, just presence, command. The fox snapped. Axel stood his ground. A brief clash of limbs and snarls followed. Sarah had turned away, heart pounding, but when she looked again, the fox had bolted, tail between its legs, back through the thicket. Axel stood trembling, one paw lifted, a small gash on his flank darkening his coat. And yet, even then, the dog didn't look toward the house for help. He turned to Noah. The boy hadn't moved, and in the silence that followed, Sarah saw something extraordinary. Axel, despite the pain, limped forward, nudging Noah gently with his nose, sniffing, checking, making sure the child was unhurt before acknowledging his own injury. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She had been wrong. For weeks now, she'd listened to the whispers on the sidewalk, heard the complaints at the neighborhood council meetings. Those breeds are unpredictable. Didn't he come from a kill shelter? It's only a matter of time before he snaps. And she had agreed, had even been the one to suggest an anonymous letter to Helen, asking her to consider the risks of keeping such a dog around children. She told herself it was about safety, about standards. But watching now, through her spotless window pane, all she saw was loyalty, discipline, love. She slid the back door open before her thoughts could stop her. The wooden step creaked beneath her sensible shoes as she crossed the fence line and slowly approached the scene. Helen had just emerged from the back porch, eyes wide, garden gloves still on. She was kneeling beside Axel, examining the wound with gentle hands, whispering words Sarah couldn't hear but somehow understood. Words that weren't meant to fix, just to be there. Noah stood nearby, his toy soldier clutched tightly in his small hands. For once, Sarah didn't announce her presence. She didn't clear her throat or preface her approach with authority. She just spoke. "I saw what happened," she said, voice softer than she remembered it could be. Helen looked up, surprised. "Oh, Sarah, Sarah hesitated, the words foreign on her tongue. "He's not dangerous. He's disciplined." Helen blinked. "He didn't attack that fox," Sarah continued, eyes resting on Axel now, who looked at her without a growl, without a trace of aggression. "He defended that boy like he was born for it." Helen didn't respond right away. Instead, she placed her hand on Axel's shoulder, a slow, reassuring pressure, and then smiled. the kind that held both pride and sorrow. "He's learning how to live again," she said simply. "And maybe we are too." Sarah let the silence settle. Then, in a move that shocked even herself, she crouched down beside the wounded dog, careful not to reach out. "Would it be all right if I brought some antiseptic from my cabinet?" she asked. "It's the veterinary kind, left over from when we had Rex." Helen nodded. "That would be kind." As Sarah stood and turned to go, she paused. "I was wrong," she said, not turning back. "About him. And maybe about a few other things, too." Noah, who had been silent throughout, took a single step forward, then another. In his small hand, he held the toy soldier out not to Sarah, but to Axel, and with slow, almost sacred precision, he placed it gently beside the dog's uninjured paw. Axel didn't flinch. He simply lowered his head and left it resting there, beside the toy. The waiting room at Oak Ridge Animal Clinic was unusually quiet that morning. A soft drizzle tapped against the windows, and the scent of antiseptic mixed with brewed chamomile from the receptionist's desk. Axel sat at Helen's feet, tense but obedient, his ears flicking at every muffled bark behind the exam room door. His side still bore the fading mark from his brief scuffle with the Foxathin Greys, no deeper than a fingernail scratch. But Helen had insisted on a checkup, not just for the wound, for peace of mind. Dr. Amira Patel entered the room like a hush of calm, wind-gentle voice, practiced eyes. She was in her early 40s, with streaks of silver framing her bun and a kindness in her posture that made even the most anxious pets settle. But Axel didn't settle. His shoulders remained stiff, his eyes alert, watching the door behind her. Helen sat on the edge of the bench, her hands resting loosely in her lap. "Let's take a look at you, big guy," Dr. Patel murmured, slowly kneeling to Axel's level. He didn't flinch, but Helen noticed how he held his breath when the vet reached for his ribs. Dr. Patel's hands were confident, yet cautious, gliding over Axel's side, brushing beneath his coarse fur with delicate care. Her fingers paused at his right flank. "Helen," she said quietly, "would you come here a moment?" Helen moved to her side. "Feel this ridge," Dr. Patel said, guiding Helen's fingers to a section of skin where scar tissue had knitted itself into a faint, irregular line. "Here and here. These are not from foxes or fences." Helen frowned. "What are they then?" Dr. Patel exhaled. "Healed trauma. Entry wounds. Bullet-sized. Old. One of them's deep enough that the tissue still puckers slightly. But see here. The surrounding fur grew back thicker. That's common when the body tries to compensate." Helen felt her throat tighten. "You're saying someone shot him?" "More than once." The vet nodded solemnly. "But professionally treated. These aren't from some backyard incident. These are cleaned, stitched, likely from a surgical vet, not domestic, possibly military." Helen's eyes widened. "Military?" Dr. Patel gave a thoughtful nod. "Or federal, border patrol, FBI, even private contractors. These scars tell me he wasn't a stray. He was trained, deployed, and he's seen action." Axel's ears twitched, as if he somehow knew they were talking about him. Helen lowered herself to the floor, resting her palm against his chest. "No wonder. He watches the door every night." Dr. Patel gave a soft smile. "That hypervigilance isn't just habit. It's programming. The way he scans his surroundings, the way he places himself between threats and your boy, that's not instinct. That's training. Deep, drilled-in training." Helen's voice was almost a whisper. "But he doesn't wear a tag. No chip. No name." Dr. Patel's brow furrowed. "Sometimes, when dogs are retired abruptly or go missing, records aren't always updated, especially if it's complicated." Helen looked up. "Complicated how?" The vet hesitated. "Let's just say, not all units retire their dogs through the front door. Sometimes they're declared unfit or expendable, and someone leaves the gate open." Helen felt her gut twist at that thought. "So he could have just been dumped?" Dr. Patel didn't answer, but the silence said enough. Back at home, the rain had tapered into a gentle mist. Axel curled near the foot of the stairs, his head resting on his front paws. Noah lay belly down beside him with a coloring book, occasionally holding up a crayon to Axel as if seeking approval. Helen sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed. She started with a simple search, K9 bullet wound German Shepherd recovery scars. Then she clicked open a dozen TABS military dog programs, retired K9 adoption centers, abandoned unit reports. Nothing matched exactly. She moved on to calling. The first vet clinic, one county over, put her on hold and never returned. The second said they couldn't share records without proof of ownership. The third asked if she was from any rescue. Helen said no. They hung up. She didn't stop. By the sixth call, she found someone who listened. A grizzled voice answered retired Sergeant Clay Moreno, now running a rehabilitation ranch for wounded military K9s in New Mexico. "Ma'am," he said after hearing her story, "you might be sitting on a ghost." Helen blinked. "A ghost? Dogs like that? No tags, no chip. Trained like that? They usually don't just disappear. They get wiped." Helen clutched the edge of the table. "Wiped? There've been rumors," he continued. "Units shutting down fast. Records scrubbed. Some of the dogs get accidentally released. Some escape. But if your boy's got bullet scars, drills for stairs at night, and protects a child like a soldier on rotation, he's not just a pet." Can anyone help trace him?" "I'll give you a few names," Clay said. "They don't talk to just anyone. But maybe you'll hit something." Helen wrote down every contact he gave, heart pounding. That night, while the rain whispered against the windows, Helen lit a small lamp in the living room and pulled out an old file boxone with her husband's handwriting still etched along the tabs. She found his records from his time with FEMA, his short deployment assisting military search teams after Hurricane Rhea. She stared at one name: Task Force 9, Joint K9, Recovery Unit. Location: Redwater, Nevada. Something stirred in her chest. She looked over at Axel, now resting his head on Noah's lap. The boy had fallen asleep sitting up, crayon still clutched in hand. Axel didn't move, but his eyes were half open, watching, guarding. "Honey," she whispered into the quiet, "who were you before us?" She didn't expect an answer. But Axel's ear flicked, just once. Then his tail tapped the floor. Once. And in the silence, it felt like something old, something buried, was beginning to awaken. The rain had settled into a fine mist by the time Helen arrived at the outskirts of Brookhaven, where the gravel road gave way to dirt. Tucked behind a weathered cedar fence stood a ranch-style home, its porch sagging just slightly, like shoulders bearing too many memories. Wind chimes tinkled softly above the door, delicate, discordant. Axel sat beside her in the truck's passenger seat, his eyes tracking every movement, every sound, every flicker in the distance. He didn't pant. He didn't fidget. He simply watched, alert, present, and eerily still. Helen glanced at the address one more time. "Mr. Everett, retired K9 handler," she whispered, voice tinged with hope and something more fragile uncertainty. She had found his name buried in the margins of an old federal dispatch list tied to K9 recovery efforts post-disaster. A footnote. A maybe. But after weeks of calling vet clinics, shelters, and dusty archives, it was the first lead that had a pulse. They stepped onto the porch together. Helen knocked once. Footsteps. A pause. The door opened to reveal a man in his 70s, stooped but strong, a cane in one hand and a scar curling along his jaw. His gray eyes flicked to Axel, then stayed there, long, longer than expected. Not fearful, not surprised, remembering. "You came about the dog," he said without prompting. Helen nodded. "I think you might have known him." The old man opened the screen door wider. "Bring him in. That's not just a dog. That's a story with teeth." The living room smelled of old books and liniment. On the walls hung photos of German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and Black Labsiege posed beside officers in tactical gear, some framed in medals, others in folded flags. It wasn't a house. It was a chapel for fallen guardians. Mr. Everett lowered himself into a cracked leather chair with a grunt. Axel didn't explore. He sat squarely beside Helen, spine straight, head high, as if standing attention. Helen noticed how his gaze wandered, pausing at certain photos, as if seeking faces he had once known. "I haven't seen that posture in years," Everett said softly. "That's not backyard obedience. That's combat memory." Helen reached into her coat and drew out the dented medallion. "He had this when I found him, embedded in his collar. No tag, no chip, just this." Everett took the medallion with trembling hands, turning it over with reverence. The metal was scorched, edges nicked. The inscription faded but not lost. 72, he murmured. Axel. Helen's breath caught. You know him? I trained him. The room fell silent, except for the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. He was part of Project Sentry, Everett continued, eyes never leaving the medallion. A private K-9 Federal Initiative off-book. Not military, not police. Specialized threat detection. Bombs, chemicals, human emotion. He could read tension before it erupted. He was one of the best. Helen touched Axel's ear gently. What happened? Everett's jaw tensed. 2 years ago, temporary holding shelter in Mississippi. Lightning strike. Fire swept through like a curse. Most handlers were deployed. Local shelter staff tried, but it was chaos. Several dogs perished, others unaccounted for. Axel was listed among the lost. We assumed he didn't make it. Axel shifted. His ears perked. You thought he died? Everett looked up, eyes wet. He was my last deployment. I retired the month after the fire. I never stopped wondering if any of them made it out. Helen felt her throat tighten. He did. Somehow, the old man leaned forward, cane pressed between his knees. Tell me, when did he start to trust you? She exhaled. He didn't. Not at first. He stood guard for weeks. Wouldn't eat unless I left the bowl and walked away. He flinched at sirens, doors, mirrors. He still patrols our stairs every night. Everett smiled sadly. It's not fear. It's duty. Even when abandoned, these dogs remember their purpose. Especially Axel. He wasn't trained to obey. He was trained to protect, even without orders. Helen's voice dropped to a whisper. He protected my grandson. From a fox. Got hurt. But checked the boy first. A long silence passed between them. Then, Everett stood slowly and stepped over to Axel. Soldier, he said gently, reaching out his hand. Axel rose, hesitated, then took one step forward, then another. He pressed his head against Everett's thigh, just once, then backed away and returned to Helen's side. Silent loyalty, unspoken allegiance. Everett's hand trembled. He remembers. Not me, maybe, but what I was. Who I stood for. Helen swallowed against the tide rising in her chest. He's not just a dog. No, Everett said. He's a survivor of silence, a living testimony to everything we left behind. Back on the porch, the clouds had cleared. Light filtered through the trees, casting golden bands across the weathered steps. Everett handed Helen a faded file folder. It's not much old training records evaluations. Might help you build a paper trail. But be careful, that program had secrets, and secrets have shadows. Helen tucked the folder into her bag. He deserves his name back, his record, his truth. Everett looked at Axel one last time. He already has something better. A home. As she started the engine, Axel climbed back into the passenger seat. This time, he looked back just one seat the man who had once taught him how to track, how to protect, how to be more than teeth and instinct. Then he turned forward again, eyes scanning the horizon. Silent, steady, homeward bound. The sun had long dipped behind the hills when Helen stepped out onto the porch, cradling a cup of tea in her hands. The evening was crisp, the kind that carried a hush in its breeze, gentle but weighty, as if nature itself were holding its breath. Out in the yard, the fire pit flickered low. Its glow didn't dance wildly like it did during family gatherings or childhood stories told under blankets of stars. Tonight, it burned solemnly, quietly like a candle left for the dead. And there was Axel. The shepherd sat with his back to the house, still as a stone, eyes fixed on the fire as if it whispered a language only he could understand. His ears twitched once, then again, but he didn't move. Helen descended the porch steps slowly. She didn't call his name. She didn't want to break whatever spell he was under. There was a sacredness to grief. And tonight, something in Axel was unraveling in silence. She came to a stop a few feet away and sank gently to the grass. The tea cupped in her hands went cold. Her gaze drifted to him, then to the flickering flames that reflected faintly in his dark eye size that had seen more than any creature should have to. She knew now. About the scars. About the program. About the fire. She whispered, her voice barely audible above the chirp of crickets. "You never left your post, did you?" Axel didn't turn, but his ears tilted toward her. A breeze passed between them, stirring the embers. She followed his gaze to the fire pit, and for a moment she saw it not as a collection of stone and ash, but as something else entirely, something smoldering and charred, thick with smoke and screams. The shelter. The night, it all changed. Helen swallowed hard. Even when no one came back. There it was, again, his ears twitching, his head dipped slightly, a shift in breath. The tightness in his body didn't release, but it trembled, as if the weight he'd carried for so long was growing heavier now that it had a witness. She set her tea on the ground and leaned forward, her hand brushing the dewy grass. I read the report again. The fire started in the east wing. Most handlers were off-site. The dogs were caged for the night. But your door was open, wasn't it? Axel didn't answer, of course, but he didn't need to. Helen could picture it now thick. Smoke crawling through vents, alarms screaming into the night, and Axel, free, maybe already wounded, refusing to leave. Barking orders no one could hear. Pacing, searching, waiting, until silence settled like soot. "Someone let you out," she murmured. "Or you broke out. And you stayed. You stayed even after it was over." Her voice cracked. It was too much for a creature without words to shoulder so many. Duty. Loyalty. Grief. Survival. "God," she exhaled, covering her mouth with her hand. "How long did you wait for someone to come back?" Axel finally turned his head. Just a little. Just enough to meet her gaze. His eyes weren't blank, weren't wild. They held history. And guilt. The kind of guilt that doesn't fade with time. The kind that clings to bone. She crawled closer, her knees pressed into the earth. Her hands reached for him slowly, not with commands, not with expectation, just presence. And when her fingers brushed the thick fur of his shoulder, he didn't flinch, but his head lowered. And then, impossibly, he let out a sound, not a growl, not a whimper, a sigh. Long and low, like a breath he'd held for years, was finally escaping. Helen's hand rested on his scarred rib, the spot where the bullet had gone in. The skin beneath was ridged and knotted, but warm. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," she said gently. "You did your job. You did it better than anyone could have asked." Axel's eyes closed, and for the first time since she'd found him on that rain-slicked road, he leaned into her touch-knot with instinct. Not with defense, but with surrender. Behind them, the door creaked open. Tiny footsteps padded across the porch. "Grammy?" Noah's voice was soft, sleepy. Helen turned slightly. "We're out here, sweetheart." The little boy rubbed his eyes and descended the steps in his striped pajamas. His toy soldier was clutched in one hand. He paused when he saw Axel, then walked over and sat beside Helen, mimicking her posture. The three of them, woman, child, and dog, sat in a quiet triangle, all facing the fire. Noah looked up at her. "Why is Axel sad?" Helen opened her mouth, but words tangled in her throat. Noah didn't wait for an answer. He scooted closer to Axel, holding out the toy soldier. "He can borrow mine," he whispered. Axel opened one eye, and slowly, carefully, he dipped his nose and nudged the little figurine, taking it gently between his teeth. Then he set it down, between his front paws, like a sacred offering. Helen's throat tightened. The fire popped, and for that one moment, no one needed words. Not even Axel. Because what passed between them wasn't grief anymore. It was understanding. It was the beginning of something new. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains in Helen's kitchen, soft and warm like a whisper. Outside, the garden lay still roses, nodding, dew shimmering, and the hum of bees drifting like a lullaby. Helen stirred a pot of oatmeal absent-mindedly, glancing out the window at the boy arriving at her gate. Miguel. He was 7, maybe 8, but carried himself like a shadow quiet, curled into himself, as if the world had always been too loud. Helen had met him once before, in the grocery store with Mrs. Ruiz, his grandmother. She remembered how his eyes never lifted from the tiled floor, how he flinched at the beep of the scanner. Miguel was nonverbal, diagnosed with autism. Mrs. Ruiz had raised him since he was 2, after his mother's overdose left a silence too heavy for a child that young to carry. Today was the first time they were visiting. Axel stood at the glass door, alert. His ears flicked forward, tail neutral. He didn't bark not once, just watched. Helen walked out to greet them. "Thank you for coming," she said softly to Mrs. Ruiz. The older woman gave a tired smile. "He doesn't do playdates." "But you said Axel was different, so we're here. No promises." Miguel clutched a faded blanket in one hand, the other buried in the hem of his oversized hoodie. He didn't look up, didn't speak. He simply stood, like a small island apart from everything else. Helen knelt beside him, lowering her voice to the rhythm of breath. "It's okay," she murmured. "You don't have to talk. Axel's good at listening." She nodded once toward the dog waiting quietly at the edge of the porch. Axel made no move. He lay down slowly, front paws stretched, eyes soft but unwavering. A statue of stillness, an invitation written in silence. Miguel noticed, just barely, a flicker. He didn't run. He didn't cry. That was enough. Helen stepped back. Minutes passed. 10, maybe 15. Miguel inched forward, inch by inch, like a tide too shy to reach shore. He never made eye contact, just moved in semicircles, watching Axel from the corner of his eye. Axel stayed, flat, calm, safe. Then, without ceremony, Miguel sat down beside the dog, not touching, just near, close enough to feel warmth, close enough to belong. Mrs. Ruiz covered her mouth with her hand. Helen said nothing. She didn't have to. "You, Creston." It was almost noon when Helen brought out peanut butter sandwiches and set them on the garden table. Miguel didn't come to eat, but he reached out to offer Axel a piece of crust. Axel accepted gently, lips soft around the boy's fingers. No sudden moves, just patience. After lunch, something remarkable happened. Miguel reached into his backpack and pulled out a small, wind-up Toya silver bird with chipped wings and a plastic key in its back. He wound it carefully and placed it on the flagstone path. Click, click, whir. The bird stuttered forward. Axel perked. His ears twitched. His eyes followed. And then, with childlike exaggeration, he pawed at the path, lightly, playfully. The toy kept going. Miguel watched, wide-eyed. Axel let out a soft huff of air. A joke, if ever a dog told one. Miguel smiled. For the first time in weeks, Mrs. Ruiz had said. And this was not a flicker. It was a sunrise. And that afternoon, Helen sat on the porch with Mrs. Ruiz, the two of them watching the boy and the dog dance around invisible rules only they understood. Axel would stand, take a step, stop. Miguel would mimic, then switch. A game, a rhythm. No words. Just trust. "I used to think he didn't like dogs," Mrs. Ruiz said, tears caught in the corners of her voice. Helen shook her head. "Not about liking, about understanding. Axel speaks a language most of us forgot." They watched as Miguel reached forward slowly and brushed his fingers against Axel's fur. Not a pet, not a grab, just a touch. Intentional, brave. Bye, Nell. That evening, after they'd left and the yard fell quiet again, Helen sat cross-legged beside Axel in the grass. He rested his head on her lap, sighing through his nose. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered, stroking the base of his ears. Axel didn't move, but his eyes were open, watching the horizon. You knew Miguel didn't need words. He needed stillness. The wind rustled the roses behind her. Helen leaned down and kissed the top of Axel's head, where the scar tissue ran like a hidden map beneath his fur. She didn't speak again. There was no need. Because sometimes, the greatest gift wasn't what you could say, it was what you could hold without breaking. And today, Axel had held a child's silence, like it was made of glass, and made it whole again. The sun dipped low over Rose Hill, its golden light casting long shadows on the sidewalk as Helen locked the front gate behind Mrs. Ruiz and little Miguel. The boy had clung to Axel's ruff with quiet trust before whispering a word so soft, so small. It trembled in the air like the wingbeat of a moth. "Friend." Helen had barely held it together, her hands trembling as she tucked Miguel's scarf back into place and kissed the boy's forehead. She watched Axel trot back to the porch, ears relaxed, tail swaying gently, not for show, but for something real, something healing. Inside, Noah sat at the table drawing again this time. A picture of Axel and Miguel under a tree, both smiling. Helen stood behind him, heart swelling. That night, as she rinsed dishes under the low hum of the kitchen light, the image wouldn't leave her mind. A boy locked in silence, a dog scarred by fire and command, and the space where something unspoken had bridged them. She dried her hands, walked to her cluttered desk, and pulled out an old manila folder. At the top, she scribbled in thick black ink, Project Guardian Heart. The town of Rosehill had never been known for grand gestures. It was a place of back-fence conversations and pancake fundraisers, of familiar routines and polite nods. But when Helen Whitmore asked to speak at the town meeting that following Thursday, people came. Some out of respect, some out of habit, and some like Mrs. Pendleton out of curiosity. She stood at the front of the community center, hands clasped, not with a rehearsed speech but with a stack of drawings Noah had made. She held one up. Miguel and Axel, under the same tree. Another. Axel lying beside a boy in a wheelchair. Another. A group of children, their hands on a dog's fur like sunlight through leaves. "My name is Helen Whitmore," she began, her voice steady but raw with conviction. "And I believe we have a chance to turn pain into purpose." She told them about Axel, not just the dog they'd seen sleeping on her porch or watching Noah with silent devotion, but who he'd once been. A federal K-9, a survivor of a fire, a ghost of duty who never left his post. And then she told them about the children. "The world can be loud," she said. "Louder still for a child who doesn't speak or who can't trust. But there's something about dogs, especially dogs, like Axel, who understand silence in a way we never will." She passed around copies of the proposal. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. She asked the town for permission to use the old library building. It had sat vacant since the flood, 12 years, Ago roof patched with tarp, books long gone, the scent of mildew seeping through the floorboards. But to Helen, it was perfect. A pause lingered after she finished. Then one voice broke it. "I remember Axel," said Sarah Pendleton, her voice softer now. "I thought he was dangerous, but I saw what he did for that boy." Another voice joined. "We've got a paint crew that can donate time." Then another. "My brother does flooring." By the end of the night, a vote passed. Unanimous. They opened the doors 2 months later. The old library smelled of pine now, and sun poured through scrubbed windows like a blessing. On the front steps, Helen hammered in a small wooden plaque. It bore no grand logo, just a hand-painted heart cradled by a paw print and the name. The Guardian Heart Setter. Axel stood beside her as she did it, tail still, head high. Inside, the shelves were repurposed to hold quiet games, therapy materials, soft blankets. Volunteers from the high school made fleece beds for the dogs. Teachers donated books on communication, animal care, and trust. And slowly, parents began to call. Not all children spoke. Not all even made eye contact. But they came, and they stayed. Axel became the center's first guardian, and every week, new rescues were slowly introduced, each evaluated, each with their own story of loss, of abandonment, of misjudgment, and each with the potential to become a lifeline for a child trying to find safety in a world that had never made sense. Helen called them pairings, but Noah called them hearts with feet. The news spread further than Helen expected. A local reporter interviewed her under the elm tree that now shaded a small garden in back of the center. Noah's drawing Miguel and Axel under a tree had inspired it. They called it the listening garden. "We don't promise cures," Helen told the camera that day. "We promise space and dogs who know how to wait." She turned to see Axel lying beneath a bench, Miguel's head on his chest. "No one teaches them that," she whispered. "They just know." One afternoon, a letter arrived. It bore no return address, only a stamped emblem Helen didn't recognize at first. When she opened it, her hands went still. It was from a former handler. The letter read, "I trained Axel under Project Sentry. I thought he died in that fire. But to know he's still protecting, that he's found a mission again. I can't tell you what that means to those of us who lost part of ourselves that day. Thank you for giving him back to the world." Helen pressed the paper to her chest. That night, as the stars blinked awake over Rosehill, Helen sat on the porch steps, Axel beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. "Do you know what you started?" she asked him softly. Axel blinked slowly, ears relaxed, breath steady. She smiled. "Guardian Heart isn't about saving dogs," she whispered. "It's about letting them save us." And Axel, as if he understood, rested his head gently against her knee. The wind carried the scent of cut grass and old brick as the doors of the refurbished library creaked open for the first time in years. Sunlight filtered through the tall arched windows, landing on shelves still bare, tables still dusty. But in the center of it all stood a patchwork rug, brightly colored and carefully stitched together by volunteers from the town, each square bearing the name of a child, a dog, or a silent hope that things could begin again. Axel lay there, still and dignified, his ears perked, eyes scanning slowly as children began to trickle in with their parents. He didn't bark, he didn't leap. He simply existed in a calm that filled the space like warmth from a hidden sun. Helen stood near the entrance, her hands clasped in front of her. Beside her, a small easel bore a freshly painted sign, "The Guardian Heart Center, where listening has no language." The first family to arrive was the Ruiz family. Miguel clutched a plastic dinosaur in one hand, his other hand tucked deep into his grandmother's coat. He paused at the threshold, eyes locked on Axel. No words were exchanged, no instructions. Axel simply lowered his head to the floor and rested his chin on his paws. Miguel crept forward, one step, then another, until he sat, not touching, but close, his knees nearly brushed Axel's side. "Hola," he whispered. A smile ghosted across his face like sunlight touching frost. "Mrs." Ruiz brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes welled up. By mid-morning, more arrived, some in strollers, some clinging to parents, others clinging to silence. They entered cautiously, unsure of this place that wasn't quite a library and not quite a home. But they saw Axel, and somehow that was enough. A boy named Jacob, whose father had recently returned from deployment but wouldn't speak, sat beside Axel and began drawing with sidewalk chalk directly on the floor tiles. Axel didn't move. When Jacob's chalk rolled away, Axel nudged it gently back with his nose. Jacob's father watched, arms crossed, unreadable, until slowly his shoulders dropped and he sat down too. In a quiet corner, a girl named Lila held a tattered storybook she couldn't read. She pressed the open page against Axel's side and said, "I think he already knows the ending." And then, almost as if the room itself breathed, laughter bubbled out. Not loud, not jarring, but real. It was the kind of laughter that had been missing, the kind that used to echo off these walls when this library held stories instead of silence. Helen watched it all from the threshold. Her heart beat with something she hadn't dared name before belonging. A teenage boy leaned against the far window, arms folded. His sister Zoe was in a wheelchair, her body tight with spastic tension. "She doesn't do well with dogs," he said flatly. "She's scared." Helen nodded gently. "Axel won't approach unless invited." The boy raised an eyebrow. "He understands that better than most people." And indeed, Axel stayed where he was, his tail giving a subtle thump only when Zoe looked his way. After a long moment, she pointed a curled finger toward him. Her brother nodded. Axel moved slow and low, belly close to the floor, stopping halfway between them. He lay down again and waited. That was how trust was built in that room, not through words or instructions, but breath and stillness and time. As the sun began to lower behind the town's rooftops, golden light spilled across the library floor. Parents gathered in small clusters. Some hadn't spoken to each other in years. Some had never met before this day. Helen lit a candle on the front desk, a small flame in memory of the old world and in celebration of this new one. Around her, the sounds were soft but full. Chalk on tile, a crayon snapping in half, a mother humming to herself, a child repeating Axel's name like a prayer. That's when the whisper came. A boy, no older than 8, leaning into his mother's shoulder, looked up at Axel, who now sat like a sentinel in the heart of the room. "He listens better than people," the boy murmured. His mother smiled, tears lining the corners of her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, he really does." Helen heard it. So did Mrs. Ruiz. And the boy's words traveled across the room like threads in a tapestry binding strangers into something that felt dangerously close to family. Outside, the streetlights blinked on, casting long shadows against the sidewalk. But inside, the Guardian Heart Center pulsed with light. Not electric, not artificial, but something older, warmer. Something that smelled like fur and paper and crayons and hope. Axel stood at last, stretching his limbs slowly, before walking toward the boy who had spoken. He didn't nuzzle or lick or bark. He simply sat in front of him. The boy looked up again. "You hear me, huh?" Axel tilted his head. The boy smiled, then nodded, as if they'd just made a deal no adult would understand. Helen exhaled. She didn't need applause or cameras or validation. She just needed this. One moment where trust was rebuilt, where silence turned into communion, and where a dog no one wanted became the center of a community trying to remember how to care. As families began to trickle out, the children hugged Axel or waved from their parents' arms. One left a folded piece of paper near his paws. It was a drawing Axel in the center, surrounded by hearts and stick figures holding hands. On the top, written in shaky but determined handwriting, were 3 words. "He saved me." Helen picked it up, her throat tight. Axel looked up at her, then leaned gently into her hip. They both stood there a while, as the room emptied, watching the last sliver of sun disappear behind the hills. The first day had ended, but something had begun. Not a program, not a project. A home, a heartbeat, a guardian's legacy. It was one of those nights when the air felt like a held breath. The cicadas had long surrendered to silence, the wind refused to stir the wheat fields, and the old oak outside Helen Morgan's window seemed to brace itself for something unnamed. Past midnight, she sat with a half-finished cup of chamomile, listening to the steady clock and the gentler cadence of her grandson Noah's sleep. Beside the boy's bed, Axel, the retired German shepherd. No one else could handle breathe in sync with Noah's dreams. A single, low bark broke the hush. Not a startle, not a question. A statement. Helen turned on the porch light. Axel stood rigid near the broken fence, muscles coiled beneath a storm-colored coat. 3 measured barks, then a glance over his shoulder. "Follow me." The breeze finally exhaled, carrying an acrid thread of smoke-burned plastic, not wood. Helen's stomach clenched. She grabbed her phone and a flashlight, and together they crossed the yard. Beyond the splintered boards lay the abandoned cannery subject of neighborhood rumors. Vandalism, squatters, worse. Tonight, a thin plume curled from a shattered window. Glass crashed inside. A hooded figure burst through a side door, clutching a metal canister. Helen's shout startled him. He dropped the can and fled. Axel did not give chase. He pivoted toward the growing flames. Sarah Pendleton robed slippers, panic appeared with her own flashlight. "I'll call 911, she called. "Don't go in." But Axel was already through the crooked doorway. Smoke rolled out in waves. Helen heard a bark, a crash, then a child's faint whimper. Heart-hammering, she stepped closer to the heat just as Axel emerged, guiding a sooty-blackened girl no older than 9. The child clung to the dog's neck like a life preserver. Axel half-carried, half-nudged her into Helen's arms before collapsing onto the grass, chest heaving, yet eyes still fixed on the fire until sirens pierced the night. Rain arrived with the engines, hissing against the flames. Water streaked through the soot on Axel's face, revealing the scar above his brow the one Helen had traced the first day he came home from the shelter. He hadn't rushed into danger out of habit. He'd resumed a duty soldered to his bones. The next evening, a new threat lurked, silent as the last. Storm warnings crawled across television screens. But to Helen, it sounded like distant chatter until Axel planted himself at the back door, rigid and unblinking. Outside, the ancient oak by the Ruiz family's playhouse leaned at an ominous angle. Helen phoned Sarah, urging her to move the grandchildren inside. As Sarah hesitated, Axel unleashed a single blade-sharp bark. Within minutes, every child was herded indoors. At 9:03 p.m., the oak surrendered with a groan that rattled window panes. It crushed the tiny yellow-on-blue playhouse into splinters, but the yard was empty. When word spread that Axel's warning had spared 6 children, a hush of gratitude rolled through the block, followed by spontaneous applause. Axel ignored the noise. He scanned the debris, then padded back to Helen's porch. tail low but steady. Little Miguel Ruiz placed a green plastic soldier at the edge of the broken path. "For guarding us," he whispered. Axel dropped beside it, one paw draped over the toy like a badge. That same storm refused to leave quietly. Flash flood alerts forced dozens of families from low-lying homes, funneling them toward the only building still lit, the town's decommissioned library, freshly refitted as the Guardian Heart Center, a place Helen had dreamed into existence for crises just like this. By lantern glow, sleeping bags dotted the parquet floors. Axel patrolled the aisles with quiet purpose, pausing to nudge a restless toddler or rest his chin beside a young girl until her breathing slowed. From behind the repurposed checkout desk, Helen watched him move. Exhaustion tugged at her limbs, but awe kept her upright. She poured coffee for Mr. Everett, a retired canine handler who had helped train Axel years earlier in Project Sentry. Everett's voice carried the soft gravel of memory. "He was never just an explosives dog," he said. "They taught him to read air pressure, crowd tension signals we can't see. Tonight wasn't training, it was heart." Lightning briefly lit the stained glass window above the entrancey open book, unfurling like wings. Families huddled beneath it, whispering thanks none of them had language for. Electricity flickered but held. Axel circled again, counting souls only. He seemed to know how to count. Helen followed him with her gaze. "I used to think rescue meant fixing something broken," she murmured to Everett. "Now I think it means believing in what's left enough to build again." Everett nodded. "Some angel spark." By dawn, floodwaters receded, and power crews restored the grid. Volunteers arrived with chainsaws to carve the oak into manageable pieces. Others brought casseroles and blankets to the center. Axel finally curled beneath the front desk, the toy soldier tucked against his chest. Sheriff Daniels stopped by, hat in hand. "Can't explain how he knew," he said, "and I won't try." He pinned an improvised ribbon blue gauze, silver thumbtack-toe Axel's collar. "Town owes you, buddy." But Axel slept through the ceremony. Guard duty was never really over. It simply paused between crises for the length of a heartbeat or a breath. Helen knelt, running gentle fingers through rain-damp fur. "Storms passed," she whispered. "Rest." And outside, the first sunlight pushed through ragged clouds, gilding the broken branches, the soot-stained cannery, the library's red brick facade. Inside, children awoke to purple dawn filtering through boarded windows, safe because one dog had listened to dangers no human ear could hear. Helen stepped onto the porch, inhaled the sharp scent of wet pine and ozone, and glanced back. Axel's eyes were open again, reflecting the new morning. Loyalty like his never slept for long. In that quiet moment between thunder's last mutter and birdsong's tentative beginning, she understood the simplest truth. Guardian Heart wasn't a building. It was a promise carried on 4 weary paws, a silent oath that someone would always stand watch when the wind refused to settle. Helen smiled, tears blurring the sunrise. "Thank you, Axel," she said aloud. Somewhere in the hush, the world seemed to nod. The storm had passed, leaving a sacred calm over Everidge. Inside the Guardian Heart Center, golden light filtered through the stained glass windows. Children laughed softly in the reading nook, where Axel's German Shepherd sat still as stone, eyes fixed on the door, waiting. That's where he was when she arrived. Clarice Rowe, hair silvered with time, paused at the threshold, gripping a worn newspaper clipping. Her voice trembled as she spoke to Helen at the reception. "I saw the article. The dog, he's Axel." Helen turned to look. Axel had lifted his head. His eyes met Clarice's, and something ancient sparked. Clarice stepped forward, crouched low. "Axel, is it really you?" He didn't rush. He walked measured and calm until he was inches away. Then he bowed his head. Clarice let out a quiet sob and touched her forehead to his. "I thought you were gone. I thought the fire took you." Helen gave them space, watching with misted eyes. Axel had belonged to Summonet. It all made sense. Clarice told her everything. The general store on Route 9, her husband Daniel, the fire 2 years ago. Axel had been more than a pet. He was their guardian. "We never found his body," Clarice whispered. "I thought he stayed with Daniel. Till the end." Helen nodded slowly. "He's been here since winter. Scarred. Silent. But never broken." Clarice looked over at the children gathered near the reading nook. He used to guard the register, read people better than a priest. One time, he stared down a man who turned out to be stealing. She smiled through her tears. I see he's still watching. Later, sitting beside Helen, Clarice watched Axel stretch out next to a boy who stuttered through a storybook. We never had children, she said. Axel was our family, our legacy. Helen's voice was soft. Then that legacy lives on. Right here. Clarice took off a rusted dog tag from around her neck. Daniel Sand placed it in Helen's hand. He's not mine anymore, she said. He belongs to all of you. Axel leaned against Helen's leg in silent agreement. Weeks later, Clarice returned. She stood on the porch, her hand over her heart, as Axel sat by her side. Helen brought tea. You could take him home, Helen offered. Clarice shook her head. Number that would be selfish. I saw a boy lay his whole heart on Axel like he was recharging. That connection. That's something I meant to give away. She paused. After the fire, I lost my husband, the store, everything. But Axel survived. He carried something of Daniel with him. And now, he carries it into these lives. Helen's eyes glistened. You believe this place can grow? Clarice didn't hesitate it. I'll fund it. A new facility, fields, a sanctuary for dogs who were forgotten, and for kids who feel the same. We'll call it the Guardian Heart Foundation. You run it. I'll handle the rest. 2 months later, it stood. A sunlit stretch of converted farmland. Dogs of all sizes roamed freely, some limping, some blind, others trembling, but learning. Axel stood at the center of the arena, no longer just a survivor, but a teacher. He approached a nervous, golden retriever pacing the edge. Lowering himself slowly, belly to the ground, Axel waited not with command, but with trust. The other dog inched forward. A quiet bridge was formed. Helen and Clarice watched from the sidelines. It's like he's passing the torch, Clarice whispered. No, Helen said. He is the torch. Children arrived daily. Some mute, some hurting, some angry. Axel met them all without judgment. He never demanded. He simply stayed until they were ready to come closer. One girl wrote in crayon, Axel is like a warm coat I didn't know I needed. A boy, older and nonverbal, brought him 3 pine cones each morning, silent offering of trust. Every evening, Axel made rounds, visiting each dog, each child. Not for discipline, but for heartbeats. He'd sit by the crates until shaking stopped, until someone knew they weren't alone. Mr. Everett, the retired principal, watched him once and said, Never thought I'd see a dog run a classroom better than I did a school. Clarice smiled. He's not running it. He's reminding them. Of what? That broken doesn't mean useless. A wall of the new sanctuary bore colorful handprints and paw prints. Above them, in painted script, it read, Where guardians find each other. Axel's paw print was the first. One evening, Clarice stood before that wall beside Helen. Axel lay beneath it, breathing calm and steady. His job never done, but never loud. I used to think he survived the fire by chance, Clarice said. Helen looked at her. But maybe, Clarice continued, he survived because someone else needed him more. Helen's voice was soft. Not just someone. Many. Axel opened one eye, looked at them. Then, with a sigh, he laid his head back down, and the mission carried on. The morning sun filtered through the branches of the old maple tree like blessings through stained glass. The town square, once quiet, once bruised by storms, and sorrow now bloomed with life. Folding chairs lined the lawn, their occupants buzzing with whispers, laughter, the occasional sniffle of pride. In the center of it all, a simple wooden sign read, Guardian Heart Graduation Day, Class of Courage. Helen adjusted a paper garland, shaped like paw prints and hearts, and looked out over the crowd. The children stood in 2 linesome shifting shyly in their shoes, some gripping leashes with the kind of reverence only young hands can offer. Each of them had spent months in quiet partnership with a dog no one else had believed in, until Axel showed them all what second chances could mean. And now, here they were, ready. Near the base of the maple, Axel lay still as stone, only his ears twitching now and then. He wore a soft, navy blue sash across his shoulders, stitched with golden thread. Around his neck hung a newly forged medallion. The engraving caught the light just enough for Helen to read it once more, her throat tightening. Born to protect, trained to love. It had been Sarah's idea. He's more than a hero, she'd said. He's a teacher now, a legacy. Efting. The first name was called Jonah Myers, age 10. He stepped forward with proud, careful steps. Beside him trotted Ember, a sandy-coated rescue once labeled aggressive. Now she moved with confidence, her eyes flicking to Jonah's every move. The crowd erupted in applause. Jonah bowed his head slightly, a bit bashful, but when Ember sat perfectly at his side and offered her paw on cue, he grinned wide enough to light up the whole county. From the second row, Mr. Everett leaned toward Helen and whispered, "That boy used to flinch when the wind blew too hard. Look at him now. Hele nodded, blinking fast." One by one, the pairs crossed under the maple. Children from homes that had weathered too many storms. Dogs from shelters that had given up hope. Now, walking in step, heart beside heart. Each pair received a certificate, a paw print medallion, and something deeper, something unspoken but seen in the way the kids glanced at their companions like they were more than animals, like they were mirrors, anchors, soulmates. When it was nearly over, Sarah stepped up to the microphone. Her voice, soft but clear, wove through the leaves like a hymn. Not all classrooms have walls. Not all teachers use words. Today we honor the bond that doesn't ask to be explained, only trusted. She paused, hand brushing the edge of the podium. Axel reminded us that love isn't what you say, it's what you show. And these graduates have shown us what resilience looks like. A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Parents wiped their eyes. A few of the older men removed their hats in silent respect. Then came the final name, Axel. For a beat, nothing moved. Then Helen knelt down beside the German shepherd and whispered, "Ready, old soul?" Axel rose slowly, with the grace of someone who had carried many things, fear, grief, fire, and somehow turned them all into something gentle. He walked forward, flanked not by one child, but by all of them. They surrounded him in a half circle, their hands resting on his back, shoulders, ears. No one led him. No one needed to. At the base of the tree, Clarice stepped forward and gently clipped the medallion around his neck. She bent down and kissed the top of his head. "For all the lives you've changed, including mine." Axel looked up at her, then at Helen, then at the children. His tail gave a slow, deliberate wag. In that moment, no one needed speeches. The sky above the maple was a soft blue brushed with gold. The wind moved through the leaves like a song only the dogs could hear. And below, hearts beat in quiet harmony. A child near the front leaned over to whisper to his mother, loud enough for Helen to catch, "He listens better than most people." The mother smiled and nodded, eyes glistening. "That's because he hears with more than ears." Helen looked around at the people-gathered families who once felt alone, children who now slept through the night, dogs who no longer trembled in their crates but ran free across the fields of Guardian Heart. This was never about rescue alone. It was about return, belonging, redemption. As the ceremony drew to a close, the children and dogs formed a procession, circling the square before returning to the old library, now a sanctuary of stories written not on pages, but on paw prints and footprints, side by side. Helen lingered beneath the maple. Axel sat beside her, leaning gently against her leg. She rested her hand on his shoulder, feeling the quiet strength still humming beneath his fur. "You started all this," she said, voice nearly lost to the breeze. He didn't move, didn't need to. Because some heroes don't bark, some hearts don't boast, and some legacies are written not in medals, but in lives forever changed. Late summer light settled over the Guardian Heart field like warm honey, softening every edge of the barn, the fence line, even the distant hills. A mild breeze carried the scent of clover and fresh sawdust from the new agility course. And somewhere a red-winged blackbird trilled, as if announcing the start of class. In the center of the field stood Axel. His muzzle was dusted with silver now. The once rich mahogany faded to a dignified ash along his shoulders. But age had not diminished the quiet authority in his stance. He surveyed the space the way an experienced captain surveys a harbor-checking currents. Only he could sense, gauging moods only he could read. The cobalt blue medallion at his chest glinted as he lifted his head. Beside him bounced Hopi, a year-old shepherd collie mixed with paws too large for her still-growing frame and eyes full of questions. Her tail swished in wide, eager sweeps. She gave a quick puppy bark, then glanced at Axel for permission. He answered with the smallest nod. Shoulders loose, ears relaxed. Yes, explore but listen. Hope pranced forward, nose low, investigating orange traffic cones arranged in a half circle. She stopped at the first one, looked back to Axel, and waited. When he stepped toward her steady, measured, she copied his gait. Nose, pause, move. The drill was simple. Learn to advance, stop, and redirect on silent cue. No shouting, no leashes. Only trust. From the sideline, Noah watched, hands in his hoodie pockets. 16 now. He was taller than Helen had ever imagined, almost gangly, with summer freckles across his nose and a quiet confidence that had grown right alongside the center itself. Today, he wore the Navy volunteer shirt bearing the white Guardian Heart insignia, a paw cradling a heart. Standing a few feet away was Elia, 10-year-old, with headphones slung around his neck. Shoulders pinched inward like he was bracing for an invisible storm. His parents had told Noah that new sounds could overwhelm him. Sudden movements could collapse the whole day. But Eli had asked softly if he might meet Hope. Noah remembered what that fear felt like. Storms inside your own skin. He crouched to meet Eli's gaze. See how Axel shows her where to stop? Noah said, voice low and even. We'll do the same, but slower. When you're ready, lift your hand like this. He demonstrated, palm open, fingers loose. She'll come when she's sure you're safe. Eli nodded but held his arm close, trembling. On the field, Axel circled Hope around the cones once more, then guided her to a halt exactly 3 paces in front of Eli and Noah. Hope sat, tail sweeping dust. Axel stood at her shoulder, an aging general flanking his bright-eyed recruit. Noah felt a swell in his chest. This, he realized, was the future Axel had prepared them for. An unbroken chain of guardianship passed from one heart to the next. Whenever you're ready, Noah whispered. Eli drew a shaky breath. Slowly, he extended his hand palm out, fingers curled like a soft shell. Hope's nose twitched. She leaned in, sniffed, and waited. Axel didn't move. He let Hope choose. After a moment, she inched forward and pressed her muzzle into Eli's palm. The boy's shoulders dropped an inch, all the tension pooling into the grass. Noah smiled. You're doing great. He eased back half a step to give them space. Hope licked Eli's thumb just once. Featherlight then sat again, eyes bright. Axel's tail thumped twice, approving. Eli looked up, blinking. He wasn't quite smiling, but something new flickered there. A question replaced by understanding. Would you like to walk her? Noah asked. Eli swallowed, glanced at Axel for reassurance, then nodded. Noah handed him the light training lead. It wasn't for control. Hope already matched the boy's pace, as if she'd practiced for weeks but for confidence. Together they walked the perimeter, Axel trailing a respectful 4 paces behind. Noah followed last, watching Hope glance back now and then, checking that her teacher still approved. Each time, Axel offered a single blink and a low, waxilent Morse code. You've got this, kid. At the far fence line, Eli paused and pointed to a row of sunflowers taller than both of them. Pretty, he said, the word small but certain. Hope barked once in agreement. Eli giggled, really giggled, and Noah felt the sound hum through the air like a chime. On their return loop, the wind picked up, rattling the aluminum shed roof. Hope startled. Eli stiffened, but Axel trotted up, brushed his shoulder against hers, and tilted his head, signaling a calm retreat. Hope mirrored him, lowering her ears, stepping back into Eli's side instead of away. Axel's steady presence became a buffer, absorbing the gust's surprise. Eli looked down, gathering courage, and gently stroked Hope's back. The tremor in his fingers eased. It's okay, he whispered. Axel stepped aside, satisfied, and resumed his shadow roll. Back near the cones, Helen waited with Clarice and Mr. Everett. each holding iced lemonades that had long since watered down. They watched as Eli slipped off one headphone and listened to Noah explaining how Hope would respond to different hand signals. The boy nodded earnestly, repeating the gestures in slow motion. Clarice leaned toward Helen. "You said Axel was slowing down," she said softly, "but I think he's just working differently." Helen followed Axel with her eyes show. He settled by the equipment shed now, lying sphinx-like as two new rescues approached with their handlers. He didn't need to supervise the whole drill anymore. His presence alone anchored the younger dogs. "He's becoming the heartbeat," Helen replied. "Not the pulse." Mr. Everett chuckled. "Old guardians never retire. They just teach the rookies where to stand." A whistle blew Sarah's cue to end the session. Children and dogs filtered toward the picnic tables where cold water bowls and apple slices waited. Eli returned the lead to Noah, but Hope stayed leaned against him, as if sensing he wasn't finished, saying goodbye. Axel rose and walked over. He dipped his head, touching Hope's ear, then nudged Eli's elbow acknowledgement, perhaps gratitude. Eli hesitated, then wrapped both arms around Axel's neck. It wasn't tight, but it was full. When he let go, there were tears in his eyes, tears that didn't look like sadness. "Thank you," he whispered. Axel licked the salt from the boy's cheek. Sunlight slipped lower, turning the field into molten gold. Noah caught Helen's eye and raised 2 fingers, the old signal, meaning he did it. She lifted her lemonade in return. In that glow, Axel walked Hope back to the kennels. She trotted beside him, still young, still unpolished, but no longer uncertain. And Noah, taller now, guided Eli toward the shade of the maple tree, explaining future classes, next steps, threads of a legacy continuing to weave. Somewhere in the distance, thunder muttered, but no one flinched. The guardian sold and knew were ready. And beneath the creaking branches, the next generation stood in good pause. Dusk settled over Willow Creek the way hush settles over a chapel when the candles have burned low. The sky wore layers of lavender and ember, fading to a cool indigo at the edges. Fireflies blinked like scattered prayers over the newly mowed lawn of the Guardian Heart grounds, and the old maple once witnessed a broken swings and daring rescue stood, robed in quiet gold. Beneath its wide branches lay Axel, his body curled into a loose crescent, the silver in his muzzle now matching the moon-washed grass. Eyes half closed, he seemed asleep, but Helen knew better. Even in rest, his ears pivoted to every cricket trill, every distant footfall on the gravel path. Around his neck, the soft gleam of his medallion caught the last traces of sun. Born to protect, trained to love. Helen approached with deliberate softness, carrying a wool blanket and 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She laid the blanket beside him and sat, stretching her legs until the soles of her shoes brushed his flank. Axel opened one eye-molten ember in the gloamingand, offered a slow wag, a greeting more felt than seen. "All the kids are gone," she whispered, handing him a biscuit from her pocket. "Hope is snoring in her crate. Noah's finishing homework. Can you believe that?" Axel crunched the biscuit, crumbs falling like tiny stars onto the grass. Helen sipped her tea, letting the steam warm the space between them. Around them, the grounds were silent, save for wind in branches and the distant splash of the koi pond fountain. She glanced toward the old library, the original Guardian Heart building. Its windows glowed mellow amber, silhouettes of volunteers still cleaning up folding chairs and rinsing paintbrushes. Each pane flickered like a memory. Miguel's first smile, Jonah's fearless stride, Eli's tentative laugh. In every reflection, Axel's story shimmered. Helen set her mug down and ran her fingers along the curve of Axel's neck, feeling the strong beat of his pulse beneath fur. "Do you know what the sheriff called you yesterday? Peacekeeper of Willow Creek." I almost laughed, but he's right. I've never seen this town so together. Axel's tail brushed the grass once. Her voice softened. "You came to heal, and now you've taught us how to heal others." For a while they sat like that woman and dog in twilight watching fireflies read their glowing script across the dimming yard. Helen thought of the first night she'd found him trembling beneath her stares, eyes haunted, body coiled, and of everything since. Fox shadows, storm warnings, broken children made brave by a silent guardian. She swallowed a lump of gratitude. "You saved Noah. You saved the Ruiz kids and the children in that fire and the playhouse." She laughed quietly. "I think you even saved me." A breeze rustled the maple leaves above, and one drifted down, landing on Axel's paw like a final diploma. He sniffed it, then let it rest. Sometimes, Helen continued, voice thickening, I worry about the day you won't be able to stand watch anymore. Her hand stilled on his neck. But then I see Hope lead the drills, and Jonah volunteering to show the younger kids the hand signals, and Noah goodness, the way he guides them now. I realize, she exhaled, the world you protected is in good hands, because you placed it there. Axel shifted, easing onto his other side. He rested his muzzle on her boot, a gesture that needed no translation. You're safe, it said. I'm still here. Behind them, the library doors opened. Clarice stepped out with Mr. Everett and Sarah, each holding leftover cupcakes and a box of art supplies. They spotted Helen under the maple and waved. She lifted her mug in acknowledgement. 3 adults who once bore skepticism now carried purpose. They turned off the porch light, leaving only starshine and the glow of garden lanterns lining the gravel walkway. Clarice's voice drifted through the dusk. Good night, Axel. He flicked an ear toward her, offering that silent salute. When the doors clicked shut, the grounds fell into deeper stillness. Helen leaned back against the tree trunk, her head resting in the groove where bark met history. You know, she mused, there are still people who ask why an old combat dog didn't stay retired in a cozy backyard, why he kept choosing watch duty instead of warm hearths. She chuckled. I tell them you did retire, right here. It just so happens your idea of retirement is being everyone's guardian angel. Axel craned his neck and licked her knuckles. His eyes, half open, shone with something between contentment and vigilance. From the trail, a soft crunch reached them, perhaps a deer at the property edge, or a late volunteer going home. Axel's head rose, ears pinning forward. He watched until the sound faded into the murmur of cicadas. Then, satisfied, he laid back down, but not before shifting ever so slightly closer to Helen's side. She felt the warmth of his flank against her calf and smiled into the night. Above them, stars blossomed small, steadfast lights flung across the heavens. Helen traced one with her gaze and let her heartbeat match the dog's steady rhythm. Rest, peacekeeper, she whispered. Tomorrow we start again. Axel closed his eyes. But Helen knew the guardianship never truly slept. Still, she felt him release a long breath, almost a sigh. And in that exhale, she heard the echo of every child who now slept soundly in town, of every rescue dog whose nightmares began to ease, of every storm that would find them ready. Willow Creek was safe tonight, not because danger no longer existed, but because Love Quiet, watchful, resilient, was wide awake beneath an old maple tree, wearing a medallion that caught the starlight. Born to protect, trained to love, and forever the heart that taught a whole town how to keep beating. Every moment we spend with a dog reminds us why love is a two-way street. German Shepherds show it in the sure set of their shoulders, the quiet watch they keep when we're not looking, and the way they stay beside us no matter how rough the path becomes. Their loyalty isn't loud, it's steady, tucked into each breath they take at our feet. And in that rhythm we find something bigger than words, proof that healing often arrives on 4 paws and a wagging tail. If tonight's story stirred a memory of your own companion, you might enjoy spending a few unhurried minutes learning a new game, a gentle massage technique, or even a kinder way to read your dog's subtle cues. The Humane Society's free guides are a comforting place to begin. I wander back to them whenever I need a reminder of how to speak dog, with my heart before my voice. Take your time, follow your curiosity, and give your good boy or girl an extra ear rub for me. Trust me, they'll understand.